Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I had been staring at the sinkhole for hours. The edges of the earth had crumbled away into a perfect jagged circle, leaving nothing but a gaping void beneath me. It was unnervingly symmetrical, as though the ground hadn't collapsed on its own but had been carved out by something, or someone. I crouched at the edge, carefully adjusting my geological scanner, but the equipment was giving me nothing but static. The readings were all over the place. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, tapping the scanner in frustration. I hadn't come all the way to Hollow Creek for faulty data. I took a deep breath and scanned the horizon. The thick pines loomed like sentinels around the campground, the pale light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the landscape. My RV sat parked a short distance away, looking small and vulnerable against the vast wilderness of Chugach National Forest. It was a beautiful place, no doubt, quiet, remote, exactly what I needed to clear my head. But the silence had a weight to it, an unnatural stillness that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was here on a solo trip, tasked with investigating the sudden appearance of several sinkholes that had been forming in the area. Geological instability was the theory, but something about the way these holes formed had raised red flags from the moment I arrived. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ethan, the local park ranger, and the closest thing to human contact I'd had in days. His voice crackled through the static as I picked up. "Hey Megan, how's it going out there?" "Not great," I admitted. "The equipment's glitching again, and these sinkholes, I don't know. They feel weird, not like anything I've seen before." Ethan chuckled, but there was an edge to it. Hollow Creek's always been strange, you wouldn't be the first to think something's off here. "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and dusting off my jeans. "You ever hear the stories about this place? Locals believe the sinkholes are more than just geological shifts. They think there's something ancient beneath the earth. The indigenous people used to call it the land that breathes. They thought the earth here was alive, that it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful." I rolled my eyes, though the words stirred an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. "Sounds like folklore to me." "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone serious now. "But I'd be careful if I were you. These woods have a way of playing tricks on you. And the sinkholes, well, they've taken people before. People who didn't listen to the warnings." I didn't respond right away, staring down into the abyss of the sinkhole in front of me. I'd studied rocks and underground formations for most of my career, but nothing had prepared me for the unnerving stillness of this place. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But I'm here to study geology, not ghosts." Ethan sighed. "Just don't go too deep, okay? Call if you need anything." I hung up and pocketed the phone, but the conversation lingered in my mind. The land that breathes. Superstition, I told myself, just old stories. I turned back to the sinkhole. Something inside me itched to see what was beneath the surface, to understand what was causing the ground to shift in such a strange, unnatural way. The patterns in the rocks I had been studying weren't like any natural formation I'd seen before. There were spirals, perfectly etched into the stone as though by design, not by nature. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't meant to find. That night, the first signs of trouble came in the form of noise, a low, deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground like the hum of a giant, unseen machine. It started just as I was finishing dinner, sitting by the campfire. The sounds blended into the whispering wind at first, but then it grew louder, more distinct, like a deep pulse coming from below. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The stars were barely visible, shrouded in the thick clouds that seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps, something moving in the dark. "Ethan?" I called, my voice small against the vast silence. Nothing. I walked toward the sinkhole, my stomach knotting with every step. The rumbling grew louder, and as I reached the edge, I felt it, vibrations under my feet. The ground beneath me was shifting, alive. I shone my flashlight down into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed by the depths. I knelt, running my hand along the edge. The earth was soft, loose, as though it had only recently begun to settle after something had disturbed it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I scrambled backward, heart racing, just as a section of the earth collapsed, sending a cascade of dirt and rocks into the sinkhole. I fell onto my back, gasping for air, watching as the hole grew wider, deeper, like a hungry mouth devouring the ground. Adrenaline pumped through me as I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a geological phenomenon. Something was moving beneath the surface. Something massive. I rushed back to the RV, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I fumbled for the key. But as I reached the door, the ground shook again, harder this time. The sinkhole was growing fast. I had to leave now. But then a thought struck me. What if I was right? What if this was something no one had ever discovered before? If I could just capture proof, if I could document what was really happening here, my work would be revolutionary. I would be vindicated. My mind flashed back to the spirals in the rock, the patterns that had seemed too deliberate to be natural. There was something ancient beneath the earth, and I was so close. I grabbed my gear and rushed back to the edge of the sinkhole. My heart pounded in my chest as I descended carefully into the darkness, lowering myself into the opening. The air grew colder as I went deeper. The walls of the hole were damp and slick beneath my hands. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The cavern was vast, much larger than I had anticipated. My flashlight illuminated jagged rock formations, but it was the carvings on the walls that caught my breath. Symbols, spirals etched deep into the stone. They were everywhere, ancient and deliberate. This wasn't just a natural formation. This was a structure, a temple of some kind, buried deep beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. I pulled out my camera, hands trembling, and began to record. But as I did, a low, resonating sound filled the cavern, a rhythmic pulse like the beating of a massive heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then from the shadows, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the deeper recesses of the cavern. Something was moving toward me. Something massive. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the stone walls. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a primal force that made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped, and then a deep, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. I ran. I didn't look back. The ground trembled beneath me as I scrambled up the wall of the sinkhole, my hands slipping on the loose earth. The growling grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the sinkhole, gasping for air, and ran toward the RV. The ground shook violently, and as I reached the door, I glanced back. The sinkhole was collapsing in on itself, the earth swallowing it whole. But for a split second, I saw something massive, serpentine, rising from the depths before it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Hollow Creek behind me. By the time I reached the main road, my heart had finally begun to slow. I was alive. I had made it. But the images of that cavern, those symbols, haunted my mind. I had uncovered something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have stayed buried, something that was still there, waiting beneath the earth. And I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be going back. The forest was supposed to be my escape. I drove the RV deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains, hoping the solitude would offer some kind of peace. I had been out here a few times before, never this deep though, but it had always been calming. Nature had a way of quieting the noise in my head. After I left the job, the silence became my companion, even though it haunted me with memories I wasn't ready to face, the accident that had ended my career as a paramedic. Every night, it replayed in my mind, always the same horrific details. But with each viewing, I saw a new way I could have saved the child. A different decision, a split second sooner, and maybe it didn't matter. I was here now alone. The sound of the gravel crunched under my tires as I parked off an old dirt road. It was oddly satisfying. I turned off the engine, and for a moment there was bliss, no noise except for the rustle of trees in the wind. This was what I needed. No sirens, no screaming. Just the mountains. I grabbed my bag and climbed out, stretching my legs before heading over to the old fire lookout tower nearby. It was a relic, long abandoned and forgotten by most hikers. The wood was graying, peeling away from years of exposure, but it stood firm, a silent sentinel watching over the rolling hills. Something about the place had always intrigued me. It had a gravity to it, like it was holding secrets that only those who ventured close enough could learn. I planned to spend the weekend here, at least 3 days before I had to go back to reality. I didn't need much, just the stillness, the mountains, and a break from the memories. I set up camp near the RV, built a small fire, and tried to let go. But the quiet was different this time. The first night, it started with whispers. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames flicker against the trees when I thought I heard voices, not nearby, but carried on the wind, faint like a conversation just out of reach. I strained to listen, but they faded, lost in the rustle of the leaves. Probably just my mind playing tricks, I told myself. I hadn't slept well in weeks, and the quiet, while peaceful, was unnerving in its own way. After a while, I retreated to the RV, exhausted, but the voices lingered in the back of my mind, soft murmurs that tugged at my thoughts. As I lay down, I told myself it was nothing, just echoes of people who had camped here long before. The wind could carry sounds in strange ways out here. But the deeper I fell into sleep, the louder they grew, until I jerked awake, covered in sweat. There were no voices, just the oppressive weight of silence. I stared at the ceiling, the same question running through my mind. Was this peace or something else? The next morning, things started to get strange. I woke to find my watch blinking, frozen at 2:47 a.m. I tapped the screen a few times, but it refused to budge. Strange. When I checked my phone, it was dead, despite being fully charged the night before. I chalked it up to bad luck, but when I stepped out of the RV, the sun seemed higher in the sky than it should have been. It was late morning, but it felt like I had only just fallen asleep. I spent the day hiking, keeping my mind occupied. The trail was familiar. I'd hiked this ridge before, but something about it felt different. Landmarks I swore I'd seen on the way up seemed out of place, or worse, missing. And every time I thought I was making progress, I'd find myself right back where I started. The same twisted tree, the same rock formation, a loop. The disorientation didn't set in all at once. It was a slow, creeping unease that settled in my bones. The wind felt wrong too, as if it was carrying something. I couldn't quite hear those whispers again. Faint, distorted, carried on the breeze. This time, they were closer. By nightfall, the voices were louder. They weren't whispers anymore, but full conversations. Disembodied words spoken in tones I couldn't place. It was like someone was just out of view, talking, laughing. At first, I stayed by the fire, trying to block it out, but the longer I sat there, the clearer the voices became. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was as if they were replaying over and over, fragments of words lost on the wind. I stood up, scanning the tree line. Shadows flickered just beyond the light of the fire. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking in the stillness. No answer. The hairs on my neck stood up as I watched the shadows shift, a figure. It moved between the trees, far enough that I couldn't see clearly, but close enough to make my pulse quicken. My first thought was that it was another hiker, maybe someone lost. But when I took a step toward it, it vanished. Gone, as if it had never been there. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it into the woods, but the beam of light revealed nothing but trees. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks again, but my gut told me otherwise. There was something here. Something I didn't understand. I retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me. But even inside, the silence was heavy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. The voices were still there, faint now, but constant. It felt like someone was standing just outside the RV, talking in circles, over and over. The next morning, I hiked to the old fire lookout. I don't know why. Something about the tower drew me in like I needed to be there. It was old, dilapidated, and crumbling, but it held a strange power. When I reached the top, I could see for miles. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched out in every direction, green and endless. I expected to feel some sense of peace, but instead a deep dread settled in my chest. The lookout wasn't empty. It was filled with the remnants of people who had come here before me. Old camping gear, torn sleeping bags, cans of food long since expired, graffiti scratched into the wooden beams, names etched into the walls, and something else carved into the center of the floor was a symbol, a crude spiral, looping in on itself. I knelt down, running my fingers over the grooves. It looked old, weathered, like it had been there forever. The voices returned, this time louder, clearer. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the tower was empty, just the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. I ran my hands through my hair, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong here. The ridge, the lookout, it wasn't just an old campsite. It was a trap, a loop, and I was stuck in it. I tried to leave that afternoon, packed up the RV, started the engine, and drove down the winding road that had brought me here. But no matter how far I drove, the landscape didn't change. The trees, the rocks, it all blurred together, the same stretches of road repeating over and over. After what felt like hours, I found myself back at the campsite, the fire now cold and dead, sitting in the exact same spot. My heart sank. I tried again. This time, I took a different route. But once again, the RV looped back to the same spot. It was as if the mountain wouldn't let me leave. By nightfall, I knew the truth. The whispers weren't random. They weren't in my head. They were echoes. Echoes of the past, of people who had been here before me, people who had tried to leave and failed. I sat in the RV, staring out the window at the darkening woods. The figures had returned. This time there were more of them. They moved between the trees, watching me, waiting. One by one, they stepped into the clearing surrounding the RV. I could see them now, faded, distorted like shadows of people long gone. Their faces were blank, their movements slow and deliberate. They said nothing, but I could hear them. Their voices, the same words looping over and over. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This was it. I was stuck, trapped in their endless loop, just like they were. The door creaked open. I don't remember what happened next. Only that I woke up the next morning sitting by the cold, dead fire. The RV door was wide open, the woods empty and still. But the whispers were gone. For now, I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't seem to work the same way anymore. Every time I think I'm getting closer to an answer, I find myself right back where I started. I'm not alone on this ridge. There are others. I can hear them sometimes, their voices echoing. If you'd told me a week ago that I'd be clutching my best friend's arm, hiding from a shadow creature in the Utah desert, I'd have laughed. That's the sort of stuff reserved for ghost stories told around the campfire, right? But now, as I crouch low in the sand, staring at the shadows shifting through the rocks like smoke, the chill in my spine tells me I was wrong. Tyler and I had been planning this trip for ages. It was supposed to be a break from our relentless lives back in San Francisco. When my promotion came through, I convinced him we had to celebrate by camping across the Southwest, ticking off bucket list spots along the way. Dead Horse Point was the prize, the place I'd looked forward to the most. Its isolation, haunting beauty, and honestly, its reputation for eerie legends that I couldn't resist. We pulled in late, just as the sun was setting over the canyon, casting a blood-red glow across the twisted rock formations. I remember that unease settled over me then, the kind that sends a tiny shiver from the back of your neck all the way down. Tyler, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as I pointed out that we were alone in this remote part of the park. Great. More room for us, he joked, snapping photos of the stunning desert horizon. It took us a bit longer to find a spot than we'd planned. Our GPS was acting weird, leading us down dirt trails that seemed to spiral into nowhere. Eventually, Tyler managed to maneuver our RV into a flat area. Not ideal, but secluded and scenic. Perfect, he said. I wasn't so sure. When we finally set up camp, the daylight had faded, leaving us bathed in the cold blue of twilight. I fiddled with our old portable radio, hoping to get some music to fill the silence, but the thing just crackled with static before sputtering and dying altogether. Tyler laughed, but I caught the way his eyes darted around the empty landscape. It felt almost oppressive, the way the land seemed to watch us, You and that ghost-loving imagination, Tyler teased, rummaging through his bag. Maybe it's a sign, or just Utah's finest weather. Ha, very funny, I replied, forcing a laugh. But this place has stories, Ty. Have you heard of the Skinwalker? The what? He chuckled, turning to face me. Mia, are you seriously bringing up ghost stories? Not ghosts, exactly, I said, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters in Navajo legends. They can mimic people, even voices, to lure you away. People say they're evil spirits in human or animal form. Tyler looked at me with that familiar, infuriating smirk. Oh yeah? Then let's summon one here. Skinwalker, show yourself. I hissed for him to stop, but he just laughed and returned to the viewfinder on his camera, snapping photos of the canyon now fully cloaked in darkness. I closed the RV door, hoping to shut out the chill that had suddenly settled into my bones. But that shiver, that sense of being watched, it lingered. It was maybe an hour later when the first sound came, a light, shuffling sound outside, like footsteps in the gravel. My heart skipped, and I shot Tyler a look, but he was already putting on a brave face, pulling his boots on to investigate. It's probably an animal, he whispered, winking. Mountain lions, right? Yeah, because mountain lions sound like people, I said, my voice barely a breath. He ignored me, clicking on his flashlight and stepping out. It was quiet, eerily so. Tyler scanned the flashlight across the rocks. The beam cast long shadows. For a moment, I was almost convinced he was right, that we were just being paranoid in the strange silence of the desert. But then we heard it. A whisper. It was faint but unmistakable. Mia? Mia? My breath caught in my throat. The voice was scratchy and low, calling my name. I whipped around to face Tyler, but he was frozen, his face drained of color as the voice echoed again. Did you? I stammered, trying to find the words. Tyler didn't answer. He just stared, flashlight clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. Mia. Mia. This time, the voice seemed closer, as if it were slipping between the rocks, winding its way through the desert toward us. It sounded familiar, too. Too familiar, but wrong. Let's go inside, I whispered. Tyler nodded, and we backed up slowly, not turning our backs on the emptiness around us. Once inside, I locked the door. Our breaths were rapid in the tight space. Tyler finally spoke, his voice shaking. Tell me that was just the wind. I don't think so, I replied, glancing out the window. The night was still, an unnatural stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Just as I was starting to feel a little less tense, there was a sharp knock on the side of the RV. We both froze. Another knock, then another, rhythmic, echoing through the metal walls. Tyler's face paled, and I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. Who's there? He called, his voice wavering. The only answer was a slow scrape against the door, a sound that made my skin crawl. I squeezed Tyler's arm. Don't open it. What if someone's hurt? He whispered back, already inching toward the door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that opening that door would be the worst thing we could do. Just wait. Then, to our horror, we heard it. Tyler's voice calling from outside. Tyler, help! Come out here! Tyler looked at me, eyes wide with terror. What? How? He stammered. The voice repeated, distorted, stretching his name into a twisted mockery. Tyler. Tyler. I grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. Don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer it. The minutes dragged by, each second stretching into eternity as the voice continued calling, beckoning us. Tyler and I stayed as still as statues, clutching each other. The silence in the RV was thick and heavy. Finally, the knocking stopped, and for a moment, all was quiet. But just when I started to breathe again, the RV rocked violently, as though something massive had slammed into it. Tyler scrambled to the driver's seat, twisting the keys to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but nothing. The shape outside pressed itself against the window, casting an elongated, inhuman shadow. It had limbs too long, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. Its mouth was twisted into an eerie mimicry of a smile that seemed to stretch too far. Oh my God, Tyler gasped, clutching the steering wheel, white-knuckled. Mia, the creature hissed, its voice a blend of my own and Tyler's, distorted, mocking. Come outside. I shook my head, my voice trembling. Don't look at it, don't listen to it. But it was too late. Tyler couldn't tear his gaze away from that awful face in the window. His breath hitched as the creature's mouth stretched impossibly wide. Suddenly he screamed, clutching his ears as if to block out the sound. I pulled him away, whispering words I barely remembered from some article on Navajo blessings, words I didn't even know if I was pronouncing right. But as I spoke, the creature seemed to pause, tilting its head in confusion, almost weakened. Seizing my chance, I dragged Tyler out of his stupor, and together, we stumbled out of the RV. The creature's eyes followed us, glowing like embers as we bolted toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. I held Tyler tight as we crouched in the shadows, watching the thing stalk around our RV, frustrated, snarling. It hissed again, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Mia, you can't hide." Tyler's hand was clammy in mine, his breath shallow. "Mia, what is that thing?" "A skinwalker," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "It's feeding off our fear." Tyler squeezed my hand tighter. "What do we do?" "We stay quiet and don't look it in the eyes," I murmured, remembering the warning. "We wait." Time seemed to slow. The skinwalker circled the rocks, searching, stalking, its low growl echoing off the stone. At one point it stopped, sniffing the air, its gaze passing right over us, so close I could see the rotting skin around its eyes. We held our breaths, not daring to move. Slowly, the creature slunk away, disappearing into the shadows. The silence stretched on, each second a lifetime. Eventually, we crept back to the RV, praying the creature had gone. Tyler tried the engine again, and miraculously it roared to life. Without a second thought, we sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we left Dead Horse Point behind. By morning, we were back in Moab, dazed, exhausted, and shaken beyond belief. Tyler's arm was bleeding from where the creature had scratched him, and I had bruises from gripping him too tightly. We warned other campers, but no one believed us. Later, as I lay awake in the safety of a crowded campsite, I could still hear it, whispering my name on the wind, lingering in the corners of my mind. Maybe it was waiting, or maybe it was just saying goodbye. Until next time. The Great Smoky Mountains had always been a dream destination, a place of beauty, solitude, and isolation where I could lose myself in the woods and maybe find myself again. After the breakup with Eric, I needed an escape, something to remind me that I was capable, that I could handle life on my own. Mark, of course, wouldn't let me do it alone. My brother insisted on coming along, and with him came Na, his bubbly girlfriend, and Lucas, a friend of his who seemed more interested in me than the mountains. The whole trip was supposed to be a solo adventure, but I caved. I figured I could handle them for a weekend. We set out early on Friday, and the trailhead was already buzzing with tourists, their laughter filling the crisp morning air. Mark led the way, checking his map obsessively while lugging around half a camping store's worth of gear. He liked to over-prepare for everything. Na, naturally cheerful, hummed some pop song as she skipped along behind him. Lucas stuck close to me, his jokes falling flat and his flirtations rolling off me like water on rock. I was there for the hike. The Smokies were breathtaking. The way the mist clung to the rolling hills, the distant sound of water rushing through the trees, the deep green of the pines and ferns that hugged the path. If I could just let myself melt into that wilderness, I thought, I might forget the reason I came here in the first place. But that sense of peace didn't last long. By the time we reached the more remote trail where we planned to camp, the crowds had thinned out. It was just us, and I was grateful for the quiet, at least at first. But as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, a strange heaviness settled over the forest. The cheerful calls of birds disappeared, replaced by an eerie stillness. "Something feels off," I said, mostly to myself. "You're just not used to the quiet," Lucas replied, a grin plastered on his face. "This is the best part, just us and the wild." I nodded, but couldn't shake the sensation. As we set up camp, Mark was his usual methodical self, making sure the tents were positioned perfectly and ensuring the fire pit was well constructed. Meanwhile, Lucas's tent wouldn't stay upright. The poles sagged despite his best efforts. Na laughed at his struggle, but I could sense the rising frustration. "You didn't exactly bring a 5-star hotel, huh?" she teased. I didn't blame her for laughing. Lucas's tent was a joke, but when the wind picked up later that night, it was less funny. The flimsy thing shook and collapsed in on him. Halfway through dinner, Mark offered to help him fix it, but Lucas waved him off. "I'll manage," he muttered, clearly embarrassed. I felt a twinge of guilt, but the night was closing in fast, and we all needed rest. We sat around the fire, the woods around us thick with shadows. The Smokies, which had seemed so beautiful just hours earlier, now felt ominous. We were miles from the nearest ranger station, out of cell service, with nothing but trees and mountains for company. And then, just as we were beginning to relax, we heard it. A distant scream. It was high-pitched, echoing through the valley. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite animal either. The sound made my skin crawl. "Cougar," Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Yeah, right," Lucas scoffed, throwing another log on the fire. "That's the Wampus cat?" He grinned, as if he just cracked some hilarious joke, but no one laughed. I hadn't grown up around here, but I knew enough about Appalachian folklore to recognize the name. The Wampus cat was the stuff of campfire stories, half woman, half beast, cursed to stalk the woods and hunt down anyone who ventured too far from civilization. "Don't joke about that," Na said, her voice wavering. "People say they've seen it." Mark, ever the pragmatist, rolled his eyes. "It's just a legend, probably an owl or something." But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The fire cast long shadows, and every crack of a twig in the distance made my heart skip. I wrapped my arms around my knees, like if trying to focus on the warmth of the fire and Na's cheerful chatter, but the unease settled deep into my bones. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves outside my tent sounded too close. I kept thinking about that scream and the way it had seemed to echo from all directions. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next day, the tension between us started to show. Mark was irritable, frustrated that we weren't sticking to his planned itinerary. Na tried to keep the mood light, but her jokes felt forced. Lucas was quieter than usual, as though the previous night's collapse of his tent had deflated his bravado. It didn't help that the wildlife we encountered seemed wrong. Deer stood unnaturally still, watching us with glassy eyes. We came across a black bear in the distance, and instead of lumbering away as they usually do, it stood on its hind legs, staring at us for far too long. I didn't mention it to the others, but I noticed that every time we passed an animal, it was facing us, not the other way around. "They're just curious," Mark said when I finally pointed it out. But I wasn't so sure. By the time we made it back to camp that evening, a low fog had settled in around the trees, shrouding everything in a thick, wet blanket. My unease from the night before returned, stronger than ever. I set my gear down near the fire pit and wandered toward the edge of camp, drawn to the stillness that felt too unnatural. As I stood there, scanning the woods, something moved in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow, a blur of movement between the trees. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again, something humanoid, but not quite. It was tall, hunched, and moved with a feline grace. For a split second, I swore I saw glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from the shadows. "Hannah?" I jumped, startled by Mark's voice. "Yeah," I lied, turning back to the fire, but I kept looking over my shoulder, searching the tree line for any sign of the creature. Nothing. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night, the woods came alive with sound. The same scream echoed through the trees, but this time, it was closer, louder. I could hear branches snapping in the distance, something big moving through the underbrush. Nala woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear. "Mark," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Something's out there." Lucas sat up too, his face pale in the firelight. "It's the Wampus cat," he said, but this time there was no humor in his voice. I glanced at Mark, hoping for some reassurance, but even he looked rattled. "We need to stay together," Mark said, his voice low and steady. "Whatever it is, it's probably just curious. Let's not provoke it." But as the night wore on, the sounds grew closer. Branches breaking, heavy footsteps circling our camp. I gripped the camping knife I kept in my pack, my hands slick with sweat. The fire crackled weakly, its light barely piercing the thick fog that had rolled in again. And then it attacked. It happened so fast. 1 minute, we were huddled around the fire, and the next, something lunged from the shadows, knocking Lucas off his feet. He screamed, scrambling to get away, but the creature, whatever it was, slashed at him with claws I could barely see. Blood sprayed across the campsite, dark and viscous in the firelight. "Run!" Mark shouted, grabbing Nala and pulling her toward the trail, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the thing that had attacked Lucas. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. Half human, half mountain lion, its eyes glowing yellow as it crouched over him, growling low in its throat. "Hannah!" Mark yelled again, and that snapped me out of it. I ran. The four of us tore through the woods, barely able to see the trail in the thick fog. I could hear Lucas behind us, his footsteps growing fainter, his breath ragged. The Wampus cat was toying with us, letting us run, letting us think we had a chance. It let out another ear-piercing scream, and I knew it was coming for us. "We need to stop it!" I gasped, my lungs burning as I struggled to keep up with Mark and Nala. "Fire!" Mark glanced back at me, his face pale with fear. "It's scared of fire." "We can't stop now," I said, but we didn't have a choice. The Wampus cat was right behind us, its footsteps growing louder, closer. I could see the glow of its eyes through the trees, the way it moved, darting between the shadows. We reached the edge of a clearing, and Mark stopped dead in his tracks. "Hannah, light it. Light everything." I fumbled with the matches in my pack, my hands shaking. We piled everything we had, gear, clothes, food, into a makeshift bonfire and lit it. The flames roared to life, casting long shadows across the clearing. For a moment, the Wampus cat hesitated, its eyes reflecting the firelight. It circled the edge of the clearing, growling low in its throat, but it didn't come closer. We stood there, panting, watching as the creature melted back into the shadows, its eyes the last thing to disappear. We stayed there until dawn, huddled around the fire, too scared to move. Lucas never caught up. By morning, we were exhausted, bloodied, and broken, but we were alive. We never found Lucas's body. Mark didn't talk about what happened, and Nala didn't speak much either. We made it back to the ranger station where they told us we'd probably been attacked by a bear, but I knew better. The Wampus cat was real, and it was still out there waiting for its next victim. I wasn't running away from my problems. I was just trying to get some space. That's what I told myself, at least, after the divorce. Everything felt too close, too suffocating. The paperwork, the empty house, the awkward conversations with friends who didn't know how to bring it up. I needed to get away, and what better way than a solo trip into the wilderness? Dead Man's Creek sounded like the perfect place to clear my head. A name so bleak it made the reality of my situation seem trivial. Just me, my dog Max, and the open road. I'd driven the RV deep into Wyoming's Wind River Range, far from the trails and tourists. That's what I wanted, solitude. I found a spot off the grid and well off the beaten path. The closest human was probably miles away, which suited me just fine. I set up camp near a bend in the creek, the water dark and slow, reflecting the towering pines above. The quiet was absolute, and I felt something like relief as I stood there, staring out at the wilderness, Max sniffing the ground beside me. "This is it, boy," I said, running my hand through his thick fur. "Just us, no distractions." Max wagged his tail, but his ears were perked, listening to the subtle sounds of the forest. The place was still, too still, but that's what I wanted, wasn't it? Peace. Quiet. No one to tell me what I'd done wrong or how I'd lost everything, just the wide open woods and the whisper of the creek. The first night was fine, quiet, uneventful. I cooked a simple meal over the campfire, Max stretched out at my feet. The stars were sharp and cold in the sky, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But that peace didn't last. The second night I noticed it, the silence. Not the calming, tranquil kind, but a deeper, unnatural stillness. There was no rustling of leaves, no chirping of crickets, no movement in the trees, just the crackling of the fire and the low, constant murmur of the creek. Max, who usually dozed off by now, was alert, staring out into the dark, his ears flat against his head. "What is it, boy?" I asked, standing up and scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows stretching between the pines. Still, Max didn't relax. His body was stiff, and every few seconds he'd let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. I grabbed the flashlight from the RV and shone it toward the woods, sweeping the beam across the darkness. Just trees, no glowing eyes, no movement. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and relaxed. Probably just a deer or something. But Max didn't relax. He growled again, deeper this time. His fur bristled, the flashlight flickered. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a faint smell, something rotten, like decayed meat left out in the sun. I wrinkled my nose, holding my breath for a moment. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that the wilderness was full of strange smells, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I tossed another log onto the fire. The flames flared up with a loud crack. For a moment, the smell faded and the wind died down. Max settled a little but remained close to me, never taking his eyes off the woods. It was only later, when I was lying in bed in the RV, that I heard it. Soft at first, like a distant whisper. Crying. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound drifted through the trees, carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a woman crying. My first thought was that maybe someone was out there, lost in the woods, but no one else should be anywhere near this area. I hadn't seen a single car, a single hiker. Nothing. Help me, the voice was faint, almost drowned out by the murmur of the creek. But it was there, clear as day. Max growled again, this time from his spot at the foot of the bed. He was staring at the door now, his body tense, ears flat. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and crept toward the door. My heart was pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to stay inside, to lock the door and ignore whatever was out there. But that voice, it was so desperate. I opened the door slowly, stepping out into the cool night air. The flashlight flickered to life, the beam cutting through the darkness. The crying had stopped. The forest was still again, but this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud, too human for this unnatural quiet. "Is anyone there?" No answer, just the sound of the creek and the rustling of the trees. Max stayed at my side, his growl low and steady. Then I saw them. Footprints. Large, old-fashioned boot prints in the damp soil near the creek's edge. They weren't mine, and they certainly weren't recent. The edges of the prints were weathered, as if they'd been there for weeks. But that was impossible. I backed up, my heart pounding, pulling Max with me. I didn't sleep much that night, the echo of the crying woman replaying in my head. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind. Too many nights alone in the wilderness. Maybe a little too much whiskey by the fire. But something gnawed at me. Those boot prints, the voice, the smell of rot. Something was wrong here. I needed answers. I spent the afternoon hiking deeper into the woods, staying close to the creek. That's when I found it. An old campsite, or what was left of one at least. A broken-down wagon, rusted tools scattered in the dirt, and a few rotting planks of wood that might have once been part of a shelter. As I looked closer, I spotted something in the dirt. A small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Carefully I opened it, flipping through the delicate pages. The writing was faded, but I could make out enough. It belonged to a woman. A pioneer, by the sound of it, who had traveled west with her family. They had camped near Dead Man's Creek, just like I had. Her entries were brief at first, describing their journey and the hardships they faced. But the later entries grew darker, more frantic. "The cold is setting in. We lost Joseph last night. He wandered too far from the fire and we couldn't find him. I hear him sometimes calling out to me from the trees, but when I go to him, he's not there. My children, they're gone too. Taken by the woods, by the creek. I can't leave. I have to find them. I have to." The final entry trailed off, the ink smudged as if the writer had been interrupted. My stomach turned, and a chill crawled down my spine. I knew the legend of the crying woman, how she had lost her family in these woods and now wandered them, searching for her lost loved ones. I'd heard it mentioned in passing by locals when I'd asked for directions to the creek, but I'd brushed it off as folklore. But now, I wasn't so sure. That night, the crying returned, but this time it was closer, louder. The weeping echoed through the trees, wrapping around the RV like a thick fog. "Help me, please." Max growled, his hackles raised as he paced near the door. I sat at the table, gripping the edge with white knuckles, my heart racing. The woman was out there and she knew I was here. The RV began to shake, the windows rattling as if something or someone was moving around outside. I grabbed the flashlight and stood up, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't stay inside forever. I opened the door. The flashlight beam cut through the dark. The crying stopped, but the air was thick with tension. The rotten smell was back, stronger this time, like it was coming from just a few feet away. And then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, her figure barely visible in the flickering light of the campfire. Her skin was pale, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. Her hair hung in tangled strands over her face, and when she looked up at me, her eyes, dark, hollow, and wet with tears, seemed to stare right through me. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "Help me find them." I couldn't move. My feet were frozen to the ground as the woman took a step toward me. Her presence was cold, so cold that the air around her seemed to freeze. Max barked, snapping me out of my paralysis. I backed up, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're not real. You can't be real." But she was, and she wasn't leaving. "Please," she begged, reaching out a skeletal hand. "My children." I could feel the temperature drop even further as she drew closer. The journal. I thought of the journal I had found by the creek, the story of her lost family, her desperation. She was still searching for them, even in death, and if I didn't do something, she would never stop. I grabbed the journal from the RV and ran toward the creek. The crying woman followed me, her wails growing louder, more desperate. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the water's edge, holding the journal in my shaking hands. "Your family's gone," I said, my voice trembling. "They're gone. You need to rest." She stopped, standing at the edge of the creek, her dark eyes fixed on the journal I placed on the ground by the water, as if offering her some kind of closure. For a moment, the weeping faded and the wind died down. The crying woman stared at the journal, then at me. Her eyes softened just for a second, and then she was gone. I left Dead Man's Creek the next morning, the journal still lying by the water where I'd placed it. As I drove away, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. Max sat beside me, his head resting on my lap, finally calm. I'll never forget the sound of the weeping or the hollow eyes of the crying woman. She's still out there somewhere, searching for something she'll never find, and I'll never return to those woods. Not again. I didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or anything supernatural. I spent most of my career chasing down so-called paranormal phenomena and explaining them with cold, hard facts. That was my job, turning superstition into science, myths into measurable data. The Brown Mountain Lights, they were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side, the air was crisp, and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited even, but as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else. Tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I'd scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip. A few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain Lights. I'd interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I'd need, high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly. And anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. "Focus," I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee, and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. Then, around midnight, I saw them. At first, they were faint, flickering, small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were. 3 lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black. The screen, dead. "What the hell?" I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I'd come here for, the lights, right there in front of me, and I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, but it was, piece by piece. The lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I was just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching because of interference, some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange, pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. The air turned cold, so cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost started forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands beginning to stiffen in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30 degrees F? Impossible. I glanced at my surroundings, feeling the silence close in around me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies, but larger, too large. I watched, heart pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense. Because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was messing with the equipment or some kind of atmospheric distortion. But then I saw the handprints, small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across, and they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest, close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles, as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast. No way they could be this close. I'd seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now they felt personal, as if they were beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking, I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came out in ragged gasps and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow. And I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way toward the forest's edge. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like something was urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead of me, their glow casting an ethereal light on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea how far I'd wandered. The lights flickered again, brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead, and then they stopped, hovering there, motionless. I took a step closer, and that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes, faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long, and there, between the branches, I saw faces. Pale, expressionless faces staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I'd taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the corners of my vision, but I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead, a welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost was so thick on the windows that it looked like snow. And there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints. Dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal and the frost melted away. But I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd come here to find an explanation, to debunk the Brown Mountain lights. But what I found was something else. Something I couldn't explain. And I knew deep down that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more. Something ancient. Something dangerous. Something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign. Old, weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I'd been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I'd picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there, framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. Yeah, I replied, lowering my camera. It's peaceful, she smiled. It always is here. I'm Ellie, by the way. Nick, I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold like she'd been standing in the shade for too long. You camping here too? For a little while, she said, her voice soft. I come here every now and then, can't stay away. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. The solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. You here for the fishing? I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. No, just the lake, the quiet. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone, just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft, melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight, My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing. Just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground, and that's when I saw her, a woman in white standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. "Ellie?" I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure. But as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second, she'd been there, and the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I'd seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, as if she already knew. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "I saw something last night. A woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when you got close." Ellie finished, her voice calm, too calm. "The Lady of Stillwater." "The what?" I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. "She's been here for a long time. Longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You're telling me she's a ghost?" Ellie shrugged. "Call it what you want, but she's real, and now that you've seen her, she won't let you go." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That's insane, is it?" Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. "You saw her, you know she's real." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. "She wants what she's always wanted, to take someone with her into the water." That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming drifting through the night air, then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight, and there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please, come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. "I've waited so long. I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in, but my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now. "Before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable, and behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater. her pale eyes following me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. My name is Justin Murphy, and back in 2020, I took my old RV up to Glacier National Park in Montana. I've always fancied myself a bit of an adventurer, even though the closest I've come to roughing it is microwaving day-old pizza. After years stuck behind a desk crunching numbers, I decided it was time to embrace the great outdoors. I figured what better way to reconnect with nature than by parking my home on wheels in the middle of a national park. Plus, if things got too wild, I'd still have Wi-Fi and a comfy bed. I arrived at the park on a crisp September morning. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of solitude. As I navigated my RV through the winding roads, I couldn't help but marvel at the towering mountains and the glacial lakes that mirrored the sky. It was a far cry from the concrete jungle I was used to. I settled into a secluded spot near Lake McDonald. There were a few other campers nearby, a retired couple named Harold and Mabel, and a solo hiker named Lucy, who seemed more comfortable with a backpack than I was with my RV's GPS system. "First time here?" Harold asked as I awkwardly hooked up my RV's utilities. "Is it that obvious?" I chuckled. "Just a bit," Mabel smiled. "Don't worry, everyone starts somewhere." Over the next couple of days, I got to know my neighbors. Harold was a former engineer who retired early to travel the country. Mabel was an artist, capturing landscapes with watercolors that seemed to bring them to life. Lucy was a wildlife photographer, chasing after creatures most people only see on postcards. One evening, we all gathered around a campfire. The sky was a tapestry of stars, and the crackling fire provided a cozy warmth against the chilly air. "You ever hear about the park's hidden trails?" Lucy asked, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Hidden trails?" I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like the start of a bad horror movie. Or a good adventure," she retorted. "There's one that leads to an old ranger station, abandoned for years." "Why was it abandoned?" Harold inquired. "Rumor has it there was an incident." Lucy lowered her voice for dramatic effect. "A ranger went missing, and they never found him." "Well, that's not ominous at all," I quipped. "Maybe he just got lost trying to find a decent cell signal." We all laughed, but there was an undercurrent of intrigue. Despite my better judgment, I felt drawn to the idea of exploring the unknown. After all, wasn't that why I came here? The next morning, Lucy convinced me to join her on a hike to find the old ranger station. Harold and Mabel opted out, choosing the comfort of their RV and a good book. "Are you sure about this?" I asked as we set off. "I'm not exactly Bear Grylls." "You'll be fine," Lucy assured me. "Besides, I've got a map and a compass. What could go wrong?" Famous last words, I muttered, but followed her anyway. We trekked through dense forests, the canopy above filtering the sunlight into a mosaic of shadows. The trail was faint, overgrown with shrubs and tangled roots that threatened to trip me at every step. "You know," I said, trying to catch my breath, "I thought off the beaten path was just a figure of speech." Lucy laughed. "Consider this a crash course in wilderness survival." "Great. Does that come with a certificate? Or at least a t-shirt that says, 'I survived getting lost in the woods'?" After a couple of hours, we reached a clearing where the remains of the old ranger station stood. It was a dilapidated wooden structure, windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. "Charming," I remarked. "Looks like the perfect fixer-upper." Lucy began snapping photos. "There's beauty in decay, don't you think?" "I'll take your word for it." As we explored the interior, I noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, circles intersected by jagged lines, accompanied by words in a language I didn't recognize. "Any idea what this says?" I asked. Lucy shook her head. "Probably just graffiti from other hikers." "Yeah, hikers who carry chisels and have a flair for the dramatic." We heard a rustling outside. I peered through the broken window but saw nothing. "Probably just the wind," Lucy said, though her voice wavered. "Right. The wind in the form of footsteps." She gave me a nervous smile. "Maybe we should head back." "Best idea you've had all day." We stepped outside, and that's when we saw him. A man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair that framed a face smudged with dirt. His clothes were tattered, hanging loosely on his thin frame. "Hello there," Lucy called out, ever the friendly explorer. The man didn't respond. Instead, he tilted his head, observing us like a predator sizing up its prey. "Maybe he needs help," I whispered. "Or maybe he's admiring your fashion sense," she whispered back. "Cargo shorts are all the rage in the wilderness." "Haha," I muttered. "Let's just keep moving." We started walking away, but the man mirrored our movements, maintaining the same distance. "Okay, this is creepy," I admitted. "Agreed," Lucy said, her pace quickening. We veered off the path, hoping to lose him in the thick underbrush. Branches scratched at our arms, and the uneven ground made every step a gamble. "Do you even know where we're going?" I asked. "Back to the main trail, I think." "You think?" "Got a better idea?" A sudden scream cut through the air. It was Lucy. I turned to see the man had grabbed her, his bony fingers digging into her shoulder. Without thinking, I picked up a fallen branch and swung it at him. "Let her go!" I shouted. The branch connected with his back, but he barely flinched. His eyes met mine, cold, devoid of any humanity. He shoved Lucy to the ground and lunged at me. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, and before I could react, he was above me, a rusted knife gleaming in his hand. "Wait!" I managed to gasp. "We don't want any trouble." He brought the knife down, slicing my arm as I tried to shield myself. Pain shot through me, sharp and searing. Funny, I always thought getting stabbed would hurt less. I blurted out, adrenaline fueling my sarcasm. "Now's not the time for jokes," Lucy shouted, scrambling to her feet. She threw a rock, hitting the man square in the temple. He grunted, momentarily disoriented. "Run!" she yelled. We bolted through the forest, branches whipping against our faces. My arm throbbed, blood seeping through my fingers. We reached the riverbank, a steep drop leading to rushing waters below. "Great," I panted. "Now what? We grow wings?" "There's a narrow path along the edge," Lucy pointed. "You've got to be kidding. Do you trust me?" "About as much as I trust gas station sushi. But lead the way." We edged along the cliffside, the river roaring beneath us. Midway across, I felt the ledge crumble slightly under my foot. "Careful," Lucy warned. "No kidding," I muttered. When we finally reached the other side, I thought we were safe until I saw him standing ahead of us. "How does this guy have a twin?" I asked, my heart sinking. He moved toward us, knife in hand. There was no escape. "Stay behind me," I told Lucy. "Don't be a hero," she protested. "Trust me, heroics aren't my style. I just have a plan." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small canister. "Bear spray." "Always prepared," I said with a weak smile. "Now you tell me you have that? Better late than never." As he closed in, I aimed and unleashed a cloud of the repellent. He screamed, dropping the knife to claw at his eyes. "Run!" We dashed past him, heading back toward the campsite. The adrenaline blurred the passage of time. All I knew was that we had to keep moving. When we finally broke through the tree line, the sight of Harold and Mabel's RV was like seeing the gates of heaven. "Help!" Lucy shouted. Harold emerged, startled. "What on earth happened?" "No time to explain," I said, gasping for breath. "Call the Rangers." We huddled inside their RV, locking the doors. I sank into a chair, my arm throbbing. "You're bleeding!" Mabel exclaimed, grabbing a first aid kit. "Yeah, turns out nature doesn't agree with me," I tried to joke, wincing as she cleaned the wound. Harold was on the radio, frantically trying to reach park authorities. Minutes later, which felt like hours, we saw the flashing lights of a ranger's vehicle. Officer Daniels stepped out, a stern look on his face. "Can someone tell me what's going on?" We recounted the events, describing the man who attacked us. "Did he say anything?" Daniels asked. "Not a word," I replied, but he wasn't exactly the chatty type. "We'll conduct a search," he assured us. As the Rangers combed the area, we stayed close to the campsite. The atmosphere was tense, the serenity of the park shattered. By nightfall, Daniels returned. We found signs of someone living in the old ranger station, supplies, makeshift bedding, but no sign of the individual described. "Great," I sighed. "So he's still out there? We'll keep patrols active," he said. "In the meantime, I suggest you stay within the main areas of the park. Believe me, I've had enough adventure for a lifetime." That night, sleep was elusive. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I sat outside my RV, a flashlight in one hand and the bear spray in the other. Lucy joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" "Not exactly the restful getaway I planned," I admitted. "At least you have a story to tell," she offered. "Yeah. What I did on my vacation, got stabbed by a lunatic." "Real crowd pleaser." she chuckled softly. You handled yourself well back there. Thanks. Though next time, I'll stick to stories around the campfire. Morning brought a semblance of normalcy. Campers went about their routines, seemingly unaware of the danger lurking in the woods. As I packed up my RV, preparing to leave, Harold approached me. Leaving so soon? He asked. Yeah, I think I've overstayed my welcome with Mother Nature. Can't blame you, he nodded. But don't let one bad experience keep you from exploring. I'll keep that in mind. Maybe next time I'll try a beach. He laughed. Less bears, more sharks. As I drove out of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Questions swirled in my mind. Who was that man? Why did he attack us? A few days later, I did some digging online. News articles from years ago mentioned a ranger who went missing, Thomas Reed. Rumors suggested he had gone rogue after a personal tragedy, losing his family in an accident. The final line of an old report caught my eye. Authorities believe Reed may still be in the area, living off the grid. His mental state deteriorated. So that was it, a broken man, lost in his own wilderness. I've always hated early mornings. Not the ones where you get a good breakfast and head into the office, but the ones where you're out in the middle of nowhere, sipping coffee that tastes like dirt and pretending you aren't waiting for something bad to happen. It was in 2002, during one of those mornings, that I found myself in a remote section of New Hampshire. The White Mountains, to be exact. Name's Derek Hemsworth. I'm a park ranger here, and today I was partnered up with this guy, Pete, one of those old-timers who thinks coffee is breakfast. If I had a nickel for every time Pete started a sentence with, "Back in my day," I'd be richer than the guy who invented that trendy camping gear everyone buys but never uses. We'd been sent to check out a part of the forest that hadn't been maintained in years. It wasn't on any maps, at least not the new ones. Some hikers had gone missing a few weeks ago. Authorities found their campsite trashed, but no sign of the people. A typical Tuesday, right? Pete and I were cracking jokes as we hiked in, the kind of jokes that probably wouldn't go over well in a crowded room, but when you're stuck out here, dark humor keeps you sane. Pete's classic, if you get lost, just find a bear, let it maul you a little, and someone will surely find the body. Not the kind of joke you share at a family dinner, but it got a laugh from me. We didn't think much about the missing hikers because, honestly, people get lost out here all the time. But about an hour into the trail, the light chatter between us died down. Pete, despite his joking nature, was a tracker. He noticed things I didn't, like the way the trees here seemed too close together or how the ground was unnaturally soft underfoot. It was like walking on a sponge. It was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Pete stopped and looked at me, then squatted to get a closer look at something on the ground. I walked over, trying to see what had him so interested. It was a footprint, but not a normal one. At first glance, it looked like a bear's, but something was off. The toes were too long and the shape wasn't right. It was almost like a hand, but bigger. Much bigger. I remember Pete standing up, his face losing its usual smirk. He didn't say anything, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. We kept walking, not saying much. Every once in a while, Pete would stop, look around, and then keep going. The woods felt wrong, like being in a place the world had forgotten. No paths, no signs of life, just dense trees and that soft, squishy ground. Then we came across the campsite, or what was left of it. The tent had been torn apart, sleeping bags shredded like someone had taken a knife to them. I looked at Pete, but he was focused on something else, a smell. It wasn't the kind of smell you associate with a campfire or old food left out. This was different. It was metallic, almost like rust mixed with something rotting. Pete walked around the site, his usual slow, deliberate movements. I stayed back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I noticed something odd. The trees had scratches on them, deep gouges like something with claws had been here. But bears don't scratch like that, at least not in this part of the country. I glanced back at Pete. He was gone. For a second, I thought he had just wandered off, maybe following the trail of whatever made those marks, but then I saw his hat lying on the ground. I called out to him, my voice cracking a little. Nothing. Not even the wind answered. I ran toward where I last saw him, my heart pounding in my chest. I was met with silence. No birds, no animals, not even Pete's voice. Just me, standing in a dead forest, staring at the empty space where Pete had been. I'm not proud of it, but I panicked. I turned and started running back the way we came. My mind was racing. It didn't make sense. Pete couldn't just disappear like that. But as I ran, I realized something. The ground beneath my feet was different. It wasn't the soft, sponge-like ground we'd been walking on. It was firmer, more solid. And then I saw them. Bones. Scattered across the forest floor, half buried in the dirt. Some of them looked human, but others, well, I don't know what they were. I stumbled back, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound, like something breathing through mud. I scrambled to my feet, looking around, but I couldn't see anything. The trees were close together, blocking my view in every direction. I'm not ashamed to admit that I ran. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to meet it. But as I ran, the sounds got louder. Footsteps, heavy and fast, crashing through the underbrush behind me. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, dodging trees and jumping over fallen logs. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually I burst out of the trees and onto an old logging road. I collapsed onto the gravel, gasping for air, my legs burning from the effort. I lay there for a while, trying to catch my breath, but the sound didn't stop. It was still coming, and it was getting closer. That's when I saw it. It stepped out of the trees, just at the edge of the road. At first I thought it was a bear, but it wasn't. It was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, its body covered in thick, matted fur. But the worst part was its face. It looked like someone had taken a bear and stretched its features, pulling them into something grotesque and unnatural. Its teeth were long, jagged, and wet with something that glistened in the dim light. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I pushed myself to my feet and ran down the road, not caring where it led. I just knew I had to get away from that thing. Eventually, I found an old cabin, probably left behind by one of the loggers years ago. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me. The cabin was old, falling apart in places, but it was sturdy enough. I barricaded the door with a chair and a few pieces of broken furniture, then crouched down in the corner, listening. For a while, there was nothing. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the creaking of the old wood. Then it came. I heard it outside, moving around the cabin, sniffing the air, like it was trying to find a way in. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. The walls shook as it scratched at the door, testing the strength of the wood. I wasn't armed. I don't carry a gun when I'm out here. We're not supposed to. Anyway, this was supposed to be a safe area. Safe. What a joke. It stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe it had given up. But then, the door exploded inward, sending splinters flying across the room. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an old fire poker, and swung it as the thing charged at me. It didn't seem to care. It barreled into me, knocking me to the ground, its teeth snapping inches from my face. I shoved the poker into its side, but it barely reacted. I could feel its hot, rancid breath on my skin as it tried to bite down on me. Somehow, I managed to roll out from under it, scrambling to my feet. The thing lunged at me again, but I ducked, grabbing a broken chair and smashing it over its back. It let out a sound, something between a grunt and a snarl, and turned to face me. I didn't wait for it to attack again. I ran. The ranger station didn't believe me at first, but they couldn't ignore the evidence. Pete's remains, the missing hikers, the wrecked cabin. They never found the creature. But I know it's still out there, waiting, and I'm done. My name is Walter Phillips, and back in 2016, I decided to take my RV up to Lake Louise in Banff National Park, thinking it was about time I embraced the great outdoors. I'm not exactly what you'd call a nature enthusiast. My idea of roughing it usually involves slow Wi-Fi. But after hitting 35 and realizing my most adventurous experience was trying sushi for the first time, I figured a change of pace wouldn't hurt. Armed with a freshly bought camping guide and an optimism that can only come from ignorance, I set out on a Friday morning. The drive was picturesque, with mountains towering on either side like silent guardians. I couldn't help but think I'd been missing out all these years, cooped up in my apartment with nothing but takeout menus and streaming services. When I finally arrived at the campsite, a friendly park ranger named Phillips greeted me. He looked every bit the outdoorsman, tall, rugged, and with a beard that probably had its own zip code. "First time here?" he asked, noticing my city slicker attire. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, glancing down at my spotless hiking boots. They were so new they squeaked. "Just a hunch," he said with a grin. "Let me know if you need anything, and watch out for the wildlife. They can be unpredictable." "I'll keep an eye out, or maybe two," I joked. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near the edge of the lake. The water was so clear it mirrored the sky, and I thought maybe nature wasn't so bad after all. Setting up camp was easier than expected, mostly because the RV did all the work. I unfolded a lawn chair, cracked open a beer, and settled in to enjoy the view. As the sun began to set, I attempted to cook over an open fire. Let's just say if there were an award for most charred hot dog, I'd be a strong contender. Still, there was something satisfying about eating under the stars, even if the food was borderline inedible. That's when I noticed a figure across the lake near the tree line. At first, it looked like another camper, but something about the way they stood there, motionless, was unsettling. I squinted, but before I could make out any details, they slipped into the woods. "Probably just another nature enthusiast communing with the trees," I muttered, taking another sip of my beer. Later that night, as I was getting ready to turn in, I heard a rustling noise outside. I thought it might be a raccoon attracted by the smell of burnt hot dogs. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped out of the RV. "Who's there?" I called out, feeling a bit foolish. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. Just as I was about to head back inside, I saw a glint of something near the base of a tree. Curiosity piqued, I walked over and found a small silver locket lying in the grass. It looked old, tarnished with age. I opened it to find a faded photograph of a young woman. How did this end up here? Deciding it was too late to ponder mysteries, I pocketed the locket and went back inside. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the RV seemed amplified in the silence. I told myself it was just the unfamiliar surroundings. Eventually, exhaustion took over. The next morning, I woke to the sound of knocking. I opened the door to find Philip standing there, a serious look on his face. "Morning," he said. "We're conducting a search. A camper has been reported missing. Have you seen or heard anything unusual?" I hesitated, thinking about the figure I'd seen and the locket. "Actually, I found this last night," I said, handing him the locket. He examined it closely. "This belongs to Emily Sanders," he said quietly. "She was reported missing 2 days ago." A chill settled in my gut. "I thought I saw someone near the woods yesterday," I added. Phillips nodded. "If you see or hear anything else, let us know immediately." He left to continue the search, leaving me with a sense of unease. I decided to distract myself by heading into town to stock up on supplies. The general store was quaint, the kind of place that sold everything from fishing bait to novelty postcards. An elderly man behind the counter greeted me with a nod. "You must be new around here," he said, eyeing me over his spectacles. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, picking up a can of bug spray. "The mosquitoes seem to think I'm a 5-star buffet." He chuckled. "City folk always taste sweeter, I suppose." "Guess I should have worn cologne made of garlic," I joked as I paid for my items. I considered mentioning the missing camper, but decided against it. Maybe it was the way his eyes clouded over at the mention of the lake. Back at the campsite, I decided to go for a paddle on the lake. I rented a kayak, thinking a little exercise might clear my head. As I glided across the water, the serenity was palpable, until I noticed something floating near the shoreline. Curiosity got the better of me, and I paddled closer. It was a backpack, half submerged. Pulling it into the kayak, I unzipped it to find clothes and a wallet. The ID belonged to a man named Daniel Lee, another missing camper. My stomach tightened. Just then, I heard the distant sound of a motorboat. Looking up, I saw a small boat heading in my direction. A man stood at the helm, waving. "Found something, did you?" he shouted over the engine's roar. "Yeah," I replied. "Looks like someone lost their backpack." He pulled up alongside me. "Let's have a look." I handed it over, and his eyes flickered with recognition. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Daniel's always losing things." "You know him?" I asked. "Oh, everyone knows everyone around here," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I can return it to him if you'd like," he offered. Something about him made me uneasy. "That's okay," I said, forcing a smile. I'll give it to the park rangers. His expression hardened for a split second before returning to a friendly facade. Suit yourself, he said, revving the engine. Be careful out here. The lake can be unpredictable. With that, he sped off, leaving me bobbing in his wake. I returned to shore, my mind racing. Who was that man, and why did he seem so eager to take the backpack? I headed straight to the ranger station and handed over the backpack to a woman named Karen. She thanked me and assured me they'd look into it. Feeling restless, I wandered over to a bulletin board displaying missing person notices. Daniel Lee's face stared back at me, along with Emily Sanders and several others. How had so many people gone missing without making the news? I approached Karen again. There seem to be a lot of missing people around here, I said. She sighed. It's been a tough year. Folks come out here unprepared, underestimate the wilderness. Is that all it is? I asked. She looked at me thoughtfully. You should enjoy your vacation. Leave the worrying to us. Unsatisfied, I left the station. That evening, I visited the local bar, the Moose's Head, hoping to glean some information. The place was a mix of tourists and locals. I took a seat at the bar next to a man nursing a beer. Rough day? I asked. He glanced at me. You could say that. Tell me about it. I came here for some peace and quiet, and now I'm in the middle of a missing persons mystery. He raised an eyebrow. You talking about the campers? I nodded. Seems like no one wants to talk about it. He took a sip of his beer. People around here are superstitious. They think the woods are haunted. I smirked. Do you believe that? He shook his head. No, but I do believe there's something out there. Like what? He leaned in. There's talk of a man who lives deep in the forest. Some say he's a former military type who went off the grid. You mean Victor? I asked, recalling the name. The man stiffened. You've met him? Briefly. He gave me the creeps. Stay away from him, he warned. He's dangerous. Before I could ask more, he got up and left. Back at the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I double-checked the locks on the RV and kept a flashlight within reach. Sleep was fitful, filled with fragmented dreams. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside, but when I looked, there was nothing. The next morning, I'd had enough. I began packing up, ready to cut my trip short. As I was throwing away the last of my gear, I noticed a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. Unfolding it, I read, "Leave while you still can." My heart raced. Was this a threat or a warning? I headed to the ranger station, but found it deserted. Frustrated, I decided to find Phillips. Driving along the main road, I spotted his truck parked near a trailhead. I followed the path, calling out his name. After about 20 minutes, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a cabin, old and weather-beaten. Against my better judgment, I approached. The door was ajar. Inside, the place was a mess, papers strewn about, maps pinned to the walls. Then I saw it, a wall covered in photographs, images of the missing campers, all marked with red X's. My own photo was among them, circled in red. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to see Victor standing there, a twisted smile on his face. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? He said. What is this? I demanded, gesturing to the wall. An unnecessary collection, he replied, to cleanse the area of intruders. You're hurting innocent people. He shrugged. Sacrifices must be made to protect the land. I edged toward the door, but he blocked my path. I'm afraid I can't let you leave, he said, pulling out a hunting knife. Desperate, I grabbed a chair and threw it at him. It caught him off guard, giving me a split second to dart past. I sprinted into the woods, adrenaline fueling my escape. Branches whipped against my face, roots threatened to trip me. I could hear Victor crashing through the underbrush behind me. Suddenly, I broke into a clearing and collided with someone. It was Phillips. Help! I gasped. Victor, he's after me. Phillips's eyes widened. This way. He led me to a hidden path that wound back toward the lake. We need to get to the station, he said. Behind us, Victor's voice echoed, You can't hide. We reached the lake and jumped into a motorboat tied to the dock. Phillips fired up the engine and we sped across the water. Halfway across, the engine sputtered and died. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned. Phillips frantically tried to restart it. On the shore, Victor appeared, aiming a rifle. Get down, Phillips shouted. A shot rang out, hitting the side of the boat. I grabbed a paddle and began rowing with all my might. Phillips joined me, and together we made it to the opposite shore. We scrambled up the bank and ran toward the main road. A patrol car was passing by, and we flagged it down. Inside were two officers who listened as we recounted everything. They called for backup and headed back to apprehend Victor. Hours later, we received word that Victor had been caught. After a brief standoff, he was taken into custody, muttering about protecting the land from invaders. An investigation revealed that Victor was a former park ranger who had lost his job due to budget cuts. He'd become obsessed with preserving the wilderness by any means necessary. Turns out the real danger wasn't the wild animals, but a man who couldn't let go of the past. After the nightmare of the past year, I thought an RV camping trip would be my escape. A chance to breathe, clear my mind, anything to get away from the wreckage of my recent divorce. So, when my buddy Maurice suggested a weekend in Carson National Forest, I jumped at the chance. We'd always shared a bond, and after the chaos of my personal life, I needed that stability. We arrived in the late afternoon, the sun sinking low, casting eerie elongated shadows through the towering pines, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers, reaching out to scratch at the sky. Maurice, ever the joker, grumbled about the lack of cell service, but I waved him off. "We're here to disconnect, not scroll through phones," I said. But even as the words left my lips, a chill crawled up my spine. Something about the forest, the silence, it felt wrong. Maurice was a big guy, built like a linebacker, but with a heart as big as his frame. He'd been my rock since high school, especially through the mess of my divorce. He was the kind of friend who'd drag you out of a dark hole if you needed it. And I needed it. We parked the RV in a secluded clearing surrounded by thick woods. The air was sharp with the scent of pine, cold enough to bite at the skin. The moment we set up camp, the serenity of the forest was already starting to feel like a lie. By evening, we sat around the campfire sharing beers, the flame crackling and dancing in the cold air. Maurice was in the middle of a story about some prank he pulled in college when we heard it. A scream, high-pitched, raw, and drawn out in a way that cut through the night. It wasn't the kind of scream that sent a shiver up your spine. It was the kind that ripped your soul open, the sound of someone in agony. We froze. "Did you hear that?" Maurice whispered, his usual bravado gone. I nodded, every muscle tense. I stood up, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Yeah, it came from over there." I pointed to the darkening woods where the trees seemed to lean toward us, their shadows thickening like a curtain closing in. Maurice grabbed the flashlight from the RV. "Let's check it out. Maybe someone's in trouble." There was an urgency in his voice, but also something else, something I couldn't place. I didn't want to admit it, but my gut was screaming for us to leave. We ventured into the forest, left the beam of light cutting through the suffocating blackness. The woods seemed alive, watching us. Each rustle of the leaves, each snap of a twig underfoot felt deliberate. My breath came in shallow bursts, a thick fog forming in the cold air. Every step deeper into the woods felt like we were stepping into a nightmare. Minutes passed, or was it hours, before the light caught something. Something that made my blood run cold. A woman. She was sprawled unnaturally on the ground, her body twisted in a grotesque mockery of life. Her face was frozen in a rictus of terror, eyes wide, lips parted in a silent scream, and her throat slashed wide open. Blood pooled around her, dark and sticky, sinking into the earth like it was being absorbed, as if the forest itself was drinking her lifeblood. I could barely breathe. My legs went weak and bile surged in my throat. I'd never seen a corpse before, certainly not one in such a brutal state. The air around me grew heavy, thick with the stench of death and rot. "We need to call the cops," I managed, my voice trembling. Maurice's eyes were wide with shock, but he nodded. "No service, remember?" He grimaced, looking up at the sky as if pleading for a signal. "We have to go back to the RV." As I turned to leave, I saw it. Movement in the trees. A shadow darting quickly between the trunks, too fast, too deliberate. "Did you see that?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. Maurice shined the flashlight where I'd pointed, but there was nothing, just the forest, dark and silent, swallowing the light whole. "Let's get out of here," Maurice said, his voice strained with urgency. We ran. The forest seemed to press in on us from all sides, the trees closing like a trap. The RV was still a distant hope, but we pushed on, adrenaline burning in my veins. Inside, Maurice slammed the door shut and started the engine. The RV roared to life, and we sped down the dirt road, desperate for any sign of civilization. It felt like an eternity before we finally got a signal, about 10 miles from the clearing. Maurice dialed the police, his hands shaking as he explained what we'd found. "We're on our way," they said. "Stay where you are." We locked the doors and waited, nerves stretched thin. Every sound outside was amplified in the silence. Every creak of the RV, every snap of a branch had us on edge. We armed ourselves, Maurice with a hunting knife, me with a tire iron, both of us staring at the door, expecting something to break through. When the patrol car arrived, we were never so relieved. The officers listened to our statement, their faces grim, and we led them back to the clearing. The woman's body was still there, just as we'd left it, undisturbed, untouched. The officers brought in a forensic team, and we were told to stay back, but we couldn't tear our eyes away. Hours passed. Officers found more evidence, footprints leading toward the trees, a torn piece of fabric. Then they found another body. A man, his body savagely mutilated, just like the woman. It was clear now, this was the work of a killer, someone who knew the forest well, someone who had been hunting here for a long time. That night, exhaustion hit hard, but sleep was impossible. The forest, once peaceful, now felt like a malevolent presence, watching, waiting. The next day, more officers arrived with tracking dogs. We stood at a distance, watching as they combed through the area. Around noon, an officer approached us, his face pale. "We found something," he said, his voice low. "A cabin. About a mile east. Looks like it's been used recently. We're gonna check it out. You two should stay here." Maurice and I exchanged a look. We weren't staying behind. "We're coming with you," Maurice said, his voice grim. The officer hesitated, but then nodded. "Stay close. Don't touch anything." The cabin was hidden deep in the woods, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. It looked more like a shack, its door hanging ajar, the air thick with a foul stench. The officers entered first, guns drawn. Maurice and I followed, my stomach churning with every step. Inside, it was a nightmare. Blood splattered the walls, and makeshift tools and weapons lay scattered on the floor. But the worst was yet to come. The table. The photographs. Candid shots of people, all taken from the forest. Each one oblivious to the death lurking just out of sight. And then the journal. A man named Ethan Krause. His sickening fantasies spilled across the pages, his methods, his satisfaction in the hunt. But the last entry froze my blood. 2 new targets, a man and a woman, recently arrived at the forest. "Those are the people we found," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. Just as we were about to leave, one of the dogs barked furiously. The handler ran off, and moments later we heard shouting. Krause had been found, armed, dangerous, a standoff. Gunfire erupted in the trees. It didn't take long for Krause to be taken down. His reign of terror was finally over. We gave our statements to the police, and everything felt like a twisted nightmare. The flashes of lights, the officers swarming the area, it was all so surreal. As the sun set, we finally left, the RV a fragile sanctuary as we drove away, our minds reeling with the horrors we'd witnessed. On the way back, we stopped at a diner, hoping for something normal. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, looked us over with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," Maurice replied, forcing a weak smile. We ate in silence, the weight of the last 24 hours hanging heavy. By the time we reached the city, it was late, and I was beyond exhausted. Maurice dropped me off at my apartment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the comforting weight of the ordinary. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the images, the screams, the mutilated bodies, the journal. I thought of the people we'd found, of how close we came to becoming just another entry in Krause's sick record. The next day, the news broke. The serial killer had been captured. Carson National Forest was no longer his hunting ground. But for me, the real horror had only just begun. The monsters weren't just in our heads. They weren't just confined to dark stories or nightmares. They were real, and they hide in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My name is Comrade Thorne, and the events I'm about to describe are so far removed from anything I could have ever imagined that I sometimes wonder if they really happened at all, or if the madness I felt during those days was just an elaborate illusion. It all began in the fall of 2011, a time when my life was as ordinary as it could be. A tech guy, working in Seattle, fixing computers, setting up networks, and maintaining a steady routine. I lived alone in a small apartment, spent my weekends hiking the nearby forest to clear my mind, and kept a few close friends. My life wasn't thrilling, but it was safe. Then came Elliot. Always the restless one, with a charisma that could make anyone follow him anywhere. We'd known each other since college. When he called me one Friday morning, urging me to join him for a weekend at his family's old cabin near Mount Rainier, I didn't hesitate. He promised a couple of days away from the grind, a little fishing, maybe some beers by the fire. The idea sounded harmless enough, a simple escape. The drive was long, 2 hours of empty road, but filled with banter. Elliot's tales from his paramedic days, mixing dark humor with absurdity, made me laugh until my ribs ached. But the farther we went from civilization, the quieter it became. Eventually, we turned off the main road and onto a narrow, winding dirt path. The trees closed in around us, the sky swallowed whole by a canopy of dark leaves. The cabin was old, built by Elliot's grandfather long ago, far from modern luxuries. No electricity, no plumbing, just the sharp scent of wood and earth. It sat on a small hill overlooking a pristine lake. Quiet, solitary, perfect. We unpacked, cracked open a couple of beers, and after a bit of settling in, decided to explore the surrounding woods before nightfall. The first day passed without incident. We hiked, fished, and drank our fill. The woods whispered with the sounds of crickets and distant owls, the fire crackling as we laughed at old stories. The world felt untouched, like we were the last two people alive in some forgotten corner of the earth. But it was the second day that changed everything. Elliot had mentioned a mine he'd stumbled upon years ago, a relic of some bygone era, and he insisted on showing me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We packed sandwiches and set off. The air was crisp, sharp with the scent of pine and earth, and the hike was more taxing than I had anticipated, but the forest was breathtaking, majestic even. When we reached the mine, I immediately felt a shift in the air. The entrance was a gaping hole in the hillside, swallowed by overgrowth. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, a deep, unnatural void that I couldn't ignore. But Elliot, ever the adventurer, was already moving toward it, eager to explore. I hesitated. Something in my gut twisted with unease, but I followed him in. The tunnel was narrow, claustrophobic. The air was damp and thick, carrying a smell of old iron and rust. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, but it was impossible to see very far ahead. The sound of our footsteps was muffled, and the silence oppressive. We walked for what felt like an eternity, until the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern. The walls gleamed with moisture, as if the very rock itself was sweating. In the center of the cavern lay a rusted minecart, its metal twisted with age. Elliot immediately rushed to examine it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone. My flashlight swept the cavern, and that's when I saw it, half buried under a pile of rubble, a human skeleton. My heart slammed into my chest. I froze. The bones were old, decades maybe, but they were unmistakably human, covered in grime, their fragile structure resting beneath the jagged rocks like some forgotten relic. Elliot, I called, my voice thick, shaking with a primal fear I couldn't explain. He came over, his face going pale as he saw what I was looking at. "Holy crap," he muttered under his breath. "What the hell happened here?" I shrugged, my mind already spinning with possibilities. Maybe a cave-in. This place is ancient. We should get out of here. But before we could turn back, we heard it. A rustling sound, faint at first but unmistakable. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the sound of rocks shifting. It was something. Alive. The noise grew louder, closer. We exchanged looks, and I could see the fear in Elliot's eyes. Real fear, the kind that only comes when you know you're not alone. "We need to go," I said, my voice tight with panic. We turned, but the sound followed us, something moving, something large, its movements deliberate. We hurried back toward the entrance, the beam from my flashlight trembling with each step. Then, Elliot tripped. His flashlight tumbled from his grasp and clattered against the stone floor. As I reached to help him up, I saw it. At the far end of the cavern, standing just beyond the reach of our flashlights, was a figure. Tall, hunched, its limbs unnaturally long. The head, too big for its body, was turned toward us, eyes glowing like burning embers in the darkness. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed Elliot's arm and we bolted. The thing's footsteps echoed behind us, getting louder, closer. We ran, gasping for breath, the tunnel twisting around us like some dark, suffocating maze. Finally, we reached the entrance, bursting out into the daylight, but we didn't stop. We didn't even slow down. We ran all the way back to the cabin, hearts pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. We locked the doors, bolted the windows, and sat in silence, not daring to speak. What the hell was that? Elliot finally whispered, his voice cracked, shaking. I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't even want to think about it. We need to leave, I said, my voice hollow. We grabbed our things in a frantic rush, my hands trembling as I fumbled with my gear. The Jeep never seemed so far away, the forest so suffocating. As we sped down the narrow road, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing chasing us. But the road remained empty. The forest, silent. We didn't stop until we were back in Seattle. We went straight to the police, telling them everything. They listened. They were patient, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Who would believe such a story? Days later, we got a call. The police had sent a team to the mine, but there was no trace of the skeleton, no sign of the creature we had described. The cavern was empty, the tunnel undisturbed. It was as if we had imagined the whole thing. But we hadn't. Elliot and I tried to go on with our lives, but neither of us was the same. Nightmares plagued us, keeping us awake in the dark hours of the night. The fear never fully faded, and eventually we drifted apart. Elliot moved to another city, and I buried myself in work, trying to forget. But I couldn't. Years later, I still think about that day. I wonder what we stumbled upon, what we saw or didn't see. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear noises, soft, distant, like the echo of footsteps in the dark, a rustling, just out of reach. And I wonder if that thing is still out there, waiting, watching. Some things are better left unexplored. Some places are better left forgotten, but the forest never forgets. I didn't know how much he hated me until we were halfway up the ridge. Sam sat in the passenger seat of the RV, arms crossed, his jaw clenched, glaring out the windshield like it had personally insulted him. The winding dirt road was a nightmare. The RV lurched and groaned as it crawled over rocks and deep ruts. The air inside felt suffocating, thick with tension. "Mom, this is stupid," Sam muttered, his voice low but sharp, like a blade slicing through the silence. I gripped the wheel tighter, the skin of my palms stretched thin. "We talked about this, Sam. We need some time away. Away from everything. Your school, my work, just us. A fresh start." Sam scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Yeah, because ditching everything and driving into the middle of nowhere is really gonna fix everything." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Sam had been like this ever since his dad left, angry, sarcastic, distant. I thought this trip might give us a chance to reconnect, to heal. But already, it felt like I was failing. By mid-afternoon, we reached the campsite, an isolated clearing at the base of Black Hollow Ridge. The ridge loomed above us like a menacing shadow, its jagged face covered in gnarled trees, creeping moss, and an ominous stillness that seemed to press down on the air. It was eerily beautiful, but something about it made my skin crawl. The forest felt wrong, heavy, like it was watching us. "Cool spot," Sam said flatly, his sarcasm hanging in the air like a poison. He kicked at the dirt and walked off, his boots crunching with each step. I busied myself setting up the fire pit, desperate to ignore the unsettling tension that clung to the place like a second skin. Sam wandered to the edge of the clearing, pulling out his phone, holding it up in vain as if somehow expecting to find a signal. Of course, there was nothing. "Great. No bars? Guess I'm stuck here with you," Sam muttered, tossing the phone aside. I opened my mouth to respond but was cut off by the arrival of a figure, a park ranger, stepping from the shadows of the trees. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. His name tag read Officer Morales. He had the friendly face of someone you'd trust at first glance, but his eyes told a different story. Haunted, weary. "Afternoon," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Just getting settled in." Morales glanced at Sam, then at the ridge, his expression hardening. "You're not planning to go too far up there, are you?" I frowned. "We were thinking of hiking some of the trails tomorrow. Stay low." Morales hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he looked back toward the ridge. The ridge has a reputation, he said quietly. Sam perked up, curiosity replacing his usual sarcasm. Reputation? What kind of reputation? Morales glanced at him, then back at me. He seemed to weigh his words carefully before speaking. Old stories. Miners who died in the shafts back in the 1800s. Some say their spirits never left. Whispers in the wind, shadows in the trees. People vanish, even experienced hikers. I wouldn't go near the mine ruins up there, not unless you want trouble. I laughed, but it came out forced, nervous. We'll be fine. Morales gave me a long, slow look, his eyes tired and knowing. Just be careful, he said, stay away from the mine. That night, as we sat by the fire, the air grew thick with silence. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The flames danced in front of us, casting long, jittering shadows across the trees. Sam was unusually quiet. His eyes flickered to the dark woods surrounding us, then to the fire. He shifted uncomfortably. Do you believe that, Ranger? Sam asked suddenly, breaking the tension. His voice was flat, distant. No, I said quickly, too quickly. He's just trying to scare us. Sam poked at the fire with a stick. Dad would have thought it was cool, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. The forest around us was deathly still. No wind, no crickets, just an oppressive silence. And then a whisper. Barely a sound, but it chilled me to the bone. I froze, my hand tightening around the mug of coffee I'd been holding. Did you hear that? I whispered. Sam looked up from the fire, frowning. Hear what? I strained my ears, but the sound was gone. Only silence. Never mind, I muttered, my voice shaky. It's nothing. The next morning, the trail ahead seemed endless. Sam trailed behind me, his boots crunching the dry earth with every step. The ridge towered above us, its jagged face casting long, sharp shadows over the forest floor. We reached the mine ruins by noon. The air here was colder, the trees more twisted, like they were reaching for us. A crumbling stone arch marked the entrance, its dark mouth yawning wide, as if the mine itself were a living thing, hungry for the souls of those who dared enter. Whoa, Sam said, his voice tinged with awe, stepping closer. Don't, I warned, grabbing his arm. Stay away. But he yanked his arm free. Relax, Mom. It's just a hole. It wasn't just a hole. The darkness inside shifted, undulating, as if alive. It felt like it was watching us. We should go, I said, pulling him away. But the unease lingered in my chest like a sickness. That afternoon, the first real sign of danger came. Sam and I had argued again. He'd stormed off, claiming he needed space, and I let him go, thinking he'd cool off. But hours passed, then 2. Sam, I called, my voice rising in panic as the silence of the woods deepened around me. I retraced my steps, calling his name over and over, but the trees were closing in, the trail vanishing beneath my feet. And then I heard it, a voice. Mom, my heart leapt. I turned toward the sound, running blindly through the trees. Sam, where are you? Over here. His voice was close now, just beyond a thicket of bushes. I pushed through the brush, my breath ragged, my pulse pounding in my ears. But when I emerged on the other side, there was nothing. No Sam, no trail, just the mine entrance, impossibly close as though it had moved. A cold breath brushed the back of my neck and a whisper tickled my ear. Leave. The moment I found him, Sam was sitting on a rock, his hands trembling in his lap. His face was as pale as death. Sam, where were you? I've been looking for hours. What happened? He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. I don't know. I thought I was following you. I heard your voice calling me, but then I realized it wasn't you. That night, the whispers returned. They swirled around the RV, soft and insistent, rising in volume the longer we ignored them. Sam pressed his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth on the bed. Make it stop, he whispered, his voice cracking. I peered out the window. Shadows moved between the trees, too fast, too fluid to be human. Something was out there, something watching us. I grabbed the lantern I'd found in the mine ruins, the cracked glass flickering weakly. I didn't know why I kept it, but something about it felt important. Stay here, I told Sam, my voice tight with fear. I'll be right back. The forest was alive, the darkness pulsing with unseen movement. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere at once, pressing in on me. My hands shook, but I held the lantern high, its flickering light cutting through the suffocating black. Show yourself, I shouted, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped, then everything fell still. And then it appeared. A towering figure, stepping out of the shadows. Its body was wrapped in darkness. Its face, if it had one, was smooth and featureless like a blank canvas. It tilted its head as if curious and raised a hand, beckoning me closer. "No," I whispered, clutching the lantern tighter, my heart pounding in my throat. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like static, and I could feel the air grow colder. "Leave us alone," I shouted, stepping forward. The lantern's light blazed brighter, and the figure shrieked, a low, guttural hiss, before vanishing back into the shadows. At dawn, Sam and I fled, leaving everything behind. We didn't speak as we stumbled down the ridge, our feet dragging, our bodies exhausted. Officer Morales found us near the trailhead, his face pale when he saw us. "You're lucky," he said quietly, as if he knew. "Not everyone makes it back." We didn't look back as we drove away, but as we reached the edge of the forest, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure stood at the top of the ridge, watching us leave. We didn't stop until we were miles away. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers. It was the summer of 1982 when I finally embarked on the RV road trip I dreamed of for years. My name's Roger. After months of meticulous planning, stocking up supplies, and preparing my trusty old RV, I was more than ready to escape the mundane and immerse myself in the open road. The first leg of the journey took me to Redwood National and State Parks in Northern California, an awe-inspiring landscape that had always captivated me. I'd always been enchanted by those towering giants, and the parks didn't disappoint. I camped in a secluded spot surrounded by the massive redwoods, with a quiet creek murmuring nearby. It was paradise. The first few days were everything I hoped for. Long, tranquil hikes, peaceful nights by the campfire, and that unmatched feeling of being entirely alone in nature. I even joked to myself, thinking the biggest danger I'd face would be accidentally stepping on a banana slug. I wish I hadn't been so flippant. One morning, I woke up early, eager for another trek. I grabbed some granola, brewed a cup of camp coffee, and was about to set off when something caught my eye. My cooler was overturned. Food wrappers were scattered around like trash. Someone, or something, had been rummaging through my stuff. I could have sworn I'd locked everything up tight, but the evidence told a different story. At first, I figured it was just a curious raccoon or maybe a bear cub. But then, my heart sank. Human footprints. And not just one set. There were two, different sizes, like a pair of people had been snooping around my camp. A cold wave of dread swept over me. Was it just some hikers passing through, or was someone watching me? I didn't want to believe it, but the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach said otherwise. I decided to investigate, following the prints deeper into the woods, away from the main trails. As I walked, the air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, like an animal sensing danger. I reached for the hunting knife strapped to my belt, just a precaution. But even as I told myself it was probably nothing, my heart hammered in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted something ahead that froze me in place. A makeshift campsite. It wasn't the kind of thing any ordinary camper would set up. Ragged tarps were rigged together like a shanty, rusted old cooking gear lay discarded in the dirt, and piles of trash were strewn about. And in the middle of it all, hunched over a small fire, sat a man. His back was to me, and he appeared oblivious to my presence, but the rifle propped against the nearby tree immediately set my nerves on edge. I should have turned around. I knew it, and common sense screamed at me to leave, but something, a terrible, inexplicable force, compelled me to move closer. I approached slowly, every step deliberate, silent, praying he hadn't seen me. Maybe I could talk to him, figure out why he disturbed my campsite, or if he'd seen anyone else around. I was about 20 feet away when it happened. The man stood up abruptly, his movements unnatural, like a predator sensing its prey. He turned toward me in one swift motion, and I caught a glimpse of his face, a thin, weathered thing, eyes sunken, vacant, like they were staring through me into something far darker. Then the crack of a gunshot rang out, echoing through the trees. I didn't even see him raise the rifle, but the sound of it split the air, the bullet whizzing by inches above my head. I dropped to the ground instinctively, my heart pounding in my chest as fear flooded my veins. He'd seen me. I scrambled to my feet, my breath a ragged mess of panic, and tore through the woods, not caring about stealth. Branches whipped at my face, roots caught at my feet, but I ran blindly, desperate to escape. I could almost hear his footsteps pounding behind me, the sound of him chasing me getting closer. But I couldn't look back. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I pushed on, knowing only one thing: survival. It felt like an eternity before I burst out onto the main trail, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running, not even when I reached my RV. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get them into the ignition. Finally, I threw the RV in gear and sped off, gravel spraying behind me as I raced down the park road. My mind was a blur of questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Who was that man? Was he alone? What the hell did he want? I had no answers. Only the image of his face burned into my memory. Those hollow eyes filled with twisted hunger. A chill ran down my spine as I put miles between myself and the redwoods. When I reached a rest stop, I called the park rangers, told them everything about the makeshift campsite, the footprints, the gunshot. They promised to investigate, but by then it was too late. The damage had been done. The rest of the trip was a nightmare. Every rustle in the bushes had me on edge. Every car that passed me on a lonely road made my pulse race, my thoughts spiraling into panic. And the nights, they were the worst. I lay awake, imagining that man's eyes, following me in the dark, his rifle aimed at me, ready to strike. I barely slept a wink. When I finally returned home, safety felt like an illusion. I installed extra locks, a security system, even started glancing over my shoulder on the walk from my car to the door. People said I was being paranoid. Maybe I was, but I couldn't shake that feeling, that sense of being hunted. I haven't been back to the redwoods since, and I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is still, I can feel that man's gaze on me, heavy and suffocating. I wonder if he's still out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting. My name is Mia Sanchez, and I'm 30 years old. What happened to me last spring in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona is a memory I can't escape. A nightmare that lingers, bending the edges of reality. I was hired by an ecotourism company to map out a new hiking trail, but what we uncovered in that desolate wilderness was not just hidden from maps, it was hidden from sanity itself. The details are slipping through my mind like water through cracked fingers. What was real? What was a product of fear? All I know is this: we stumbled into something ancient and hungry, something that made it clear we weren't meant to leave. I brought my childhood friend Jamie and my intern Liv along, both of them unknowing passengers on a journey into the heart of terror. Jamie, 28, lived for the thrill. He was all reckless energy, always chasing the next adrenaline rush like he could outrun whatever haunted him. Liv, 25, was the opposite. Quiet, city-born, and jumpy, flinching at every gust of wind or shift in the shadows. I thought they'd balance each other out. I was wrong. The drive to the Superstitions was long, the roads winding through sun-scorched desert that stretched on endlessly, giving me the creeping sensation that we were driving into a place where time didn't exist. When we reached the trailhead, we parked the Jeep, geared up, and set off into the canyon. I'd been here before, but something felt different this time, darker. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the wind whispered through the jagged rock formations like it was trying to tell us something. That first night, we set up camp by a dry creek bed. Jamie realized he'd left one of the GPS devices back in the car. Liv gave him a sharp glare. "Really?" she muttered. "Are you kidding me?" "Relax," Jamie grinned, unbothered. "We've got another GPS, and we've got maps. We're fine." I wasn't convinced. The Superstitions were notorious for swallowing people whole, people who got lost and never came back. But Jamie's confidence was infectious, and Liv seemed eager to prove herself. So I let it slide. That night, as we sat around the fire, I thought I heard something, someone, calling my name. I froze. Liv's eyes were wide with terror as she whispered, "Did you hear that?" Her voice barely reached above a breath. "Hear what?" Jamie said, scanning the dark. "It sounded like someone was calling me," Liv said. Jamie laughed, but it wasn't his usual carefree chuckle. "It's just the wind, Liv. Chill out." But I heard it too, a faint, distant whisper that sounded far too real. It was a voice, calling my name. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing, but Liv kept glancing nervously over her shoulder, her skin pale under the flickering firelight. The next day, we packed up and ventured deeper into the canyon, trying to stick to the trail. But by midday, the desert had swallowed any signs of it. The landmarks didn't line up with the map. The storm came fast, dark clouds roiling up from the horizon, heavy with the promise of disaster. Within minutes, the dry creek beds became torrents, and we scrambled to set up camp, drenched in the first torrential drops. When the storm finally passed, we discovered that some of our gear had been swept away, including one of the maps. Liv was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she tried to salvage what remained of her pack. "Great," Jamie muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now we're down a GPS and a map. Perfect." I tried to stay calm, but the unfamiliar landscape surrounding us felt like an inescapable maze. A knot of dread tightened in my chest. That evening, as I explored the area near our camp, I found something strange. A rusted pickaxe buried beneath a pile of rocks. The handle was covered in symbols I didn't recognize, strange etchings, jagged and twisted. I showed it to Jamie, who immediately started cracking jokes about curses and treasure. But Liv wasn't laughing. Her face was pale, her voice edged with fear. "We shouldn't be messing with this," she said. "It's just an old tool," I tried to reassure her, though a part of me was unsettled. Something about it felt wrong, but Jamie insisted on keeping it. With a grin, he tucked it into his pack. That night, the whispers came again. Louder. All around us. They moved through the trees between the rocks like they were alive, watching us. I lay awake in my tent, straining to make out the words, but they were just out of reach. And when I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed of figures. Tall, shadowy, standing on the ridge. Their faces were featureless, their limbs impossibly long, twitching unnaturally in the moonlight. When we woke, the nightmare had bled into reality. We found strange footprints surrounding our camp. At first they looked human, but something was wrong. The toes were too long, the prints were too deep. Jamie brushed it off, laughing it away as a trick of the rain. But Liv, she was pale as death, her mouth a tight line of fear. We pressed on, hoping to get back to the main trail, but the canyon seemed to shift. The landmarks didn't match the map. The GPS failed to get a signal. At the top of a ridge, Liv gasped, her hand shooting out. "There's someone watching us," she whispered. I looked. There, on a distant ridge, stood a shadowy figure, too far away to make out any details. It didn't move, didn't acknowledge us. It just stood there, watching. Jamie waved and yelled, but it didn't respond. After a few agonizing minutes, it simply turned and disappeared into the darkness. When we made camp that night, the air was thick with tension. Liv barely spoke. Even Jamie, usually the life of the group, was unnervingly quiet. As we sat around the fire, the whispers returned. Louder, insistent, weaving through the trees like a chorus of voices, their cadence growing darker. Then, the fire went out. The night swallowed us whole. I fumbled for my flashlight. When the beam flickered on, it landed on something that froze the blood in my veins. A figure, gaunt, skeletal, stood just outside the ring of light. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet controlled by an unsteady hand. Jamie grabbed the flare gun and fired, but the figure didn't flinch. It didn't even acknowledge the flare. It tilted its head, studying us with eyes that I couldn't see. Then, without a sound, it vanished into the darkness. We decided to leave at first light, but the creature wasn't done with us. As we packed up, it began to mimic our voices, calling to us from different directions in perfect imitation. Jamie thought he heard me calling for help and nearly ran into the trees. I had to grab him to stop him. And then it attacked. We were halfway up the ridge when a boulder came tumbling down, knocking Jamie off his feet. He screamed in agony as his leg twisted in a sickening direction. Liv and I managed to drag him to a small clearing, but the creature was still out there, its shadow flitting between the trees, always just out of reach. Liv, who had done some research on Navajo legends before the trip, remembered something. "It's a skinwalker," she said, her voice trembling. "Shapeshifters. They feed on fear and chaos. We can't look it in the eye," she added, her face pale, "and we can't say its name." We used a makeshift stretcher to carry Jamie, moving as fast as we could, but the creature followed us. Always close, always just out of sight. At one point it called out Jamie's voice, begging us to stop, to rest. When we ignored it, the whispers turned to screams, guttural and primal, piercing my eardrums. By the time we reached the trailhead, the creature finally seemed to lose interest. It disappeared into the trees, leaving only silence in its wake. But as we loaded Jamie into the Jeep, I looked back at the rear window. There, pressed into the glass, were handprints, too large, elongated. They were not human. Jamie survived, but he's not the same. Liv quit the internship and refuses to talk about what happened. As for me, I can't stop thinking about the etchings on that cursed pickaxe, the whispers that still haunt me, calling my name in the dead of night. And sometimes just before sleep, I swear I hear them again, faint, far away, but unmistakable, calling my name. It started off like any other camping trip. I was out in my RV enjoying the peace and quiet of the Appalachian Mountains. I had always found solace in nature, especially after my divorce last year. I thought a solo trip would clear my head and help me reconnect with myself. My name's Warren Grady. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but let's just say life hasn't been a smooth ride. I've had my share of ups and downs, and this trip was supposed to be an up for me, a little escape from the daily grind. The campsite was perfect, nestled in a small clearing with tall pines all around. The air was crisp and the scent of pine needles filled my lungs. I parked the RV, set up my little fire pit, and settled into my chair with a cold beer. Everything seemed perfect. As dusk fell, I noticed a faint trail leading deeper into the woods. Being a curious guy, I decided to follow it, hoping to find a good spot for fishing in the morning. The trail was narrow and overgrown, clearly not used much. I walked for about 20 minutes, the sounds of nature my only companion, until I stumbled upon an old dilapidated cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The windows were broken, the wood rotting, and the door hung off its hinges. Something about the place gave me the creeps, but I brushed it off. It was just an old cabin, right? I made a mental note to avoid it and headed back to my campsite. The fire was still burning when I returned, casting flickering shadows around the clearing. I cooked a simple meal, had a couple more beers, and decided to call it a night. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I heard whispers. Faint, almost inaudible, but definitely human. My heart raced as I reached for the flashlight and my hunting knife. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, and the last thing I expected was company. I peeked out of the RV window but saw nothing. The whispers had stopped, replaced by the rustling of leaves in the wind. I told myself it was just my imagination and went back to bed, though it took a while to fall asleep. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of unease. The memory of the whispers lingered in my mind, but the bright sunlight made it seem almost silly. I decided to shake it off and enjoy my day. After a quick breakfast, I grabbed my fishing gear and headed back to the trail. The cabin looked even more eerie in the daylight. I walked past it, feeling its presence like a weight on my shoulders. The trail eventually led to a beautiful, secluded stream. I set up my gear and spent the next few hours in peaceful solitude, catching a few fish and enjoying the quiet. On my way back to the campsite, I noticed something strange. The door of the cabin, which had been hanging off its hinges the previous day, was now closed. I froze, staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. Someone had been there. I approached the cabin cautiously, my knife in hand. I knocked on the door, half expecting it to fall off its hinges, but it stayed put. There was no answer. I pushed the door open slowly and peered inside. The interior was dark and musty, with broken furniture strewn about. There was no sign of anyone. As I turned to leave, I noticed something glinting on the floor. It was a small metal locket. I picked it up and examined it. Inside was a faded photo of a woman and a little girl. I slipped it into my pocket, intending to take it to the local authorities when I got back to town. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept the fire burning high and stayed close to the RV. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set me on edge. Around midnight, I heard the whispers again, louder this time. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, determined to find the source. I followed the sound into the woods, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The whispers led me back to the cabin. This time, the door was wide open. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, leading me to a trapdoor in the corner of the room. I hesitated for a moment, then lifted the trapdoor. A narrow staircase led down into the darkness. I descended slowly, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, I found a small dirt-floored cellar. In the center of the room was a large wooden crate. The whispers stopped as I approached the crate. I pried it open with my knife, revealing a gruesome sight. Inside were the skeletal remains of several people, their bones twisted and broken. My stomach churned as I backed away, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, knife ready, and came face to face with a man. He was tall and gaunt, with wild hair and eyes that gleamed with madness. He lunged at me and we struggled, rolling across the dirt floor. I slashed at him with the knife, but he was strong and relentless. He pinned me to the ground, his hands around my throat. I fought back with all my strength, managing to throw him off. He stumbled, hitting his head on the edge of the crate. He lay still, blood pooling around his head. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air. My hands shook as I picked up the flashlight and knife. I needed to get out of there, to get help. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear the whispers again, fainter now, almost pleading. I ran back to the RV, my mind racing. I needed to get to the nearest town and report what I had found. I packed up my things quickly, my hands still trembling. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin one last time. It stood there, silent and ominous, as if watching me leave. I made it to the nearest town and went straight to the sheriff's office. I told them everything, showed them the locket, and led them back to the cabin. The sheriff and his deputies searched the place thoroughly. They found the remains in the cellar and identified them as several missing persons from the past decade. The man I had fought was a drifter, a serial killer who had been hiding in the woods for years. He had been using the cabin as his hideout, luring campers and hikers to their deaths. The whispers I had heard were from his victims, their voices lingering in the place where they had met their end. The authorities thanked me for my help and assured me that the man would never harm anyone again. They took the locket to identify the woman and child in the photo and to bring closure to their families. As I drove back home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had survived something horrific, and in doing so had helped bring justice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. The memories of that night would stay with me, but I wouldn't let them haunt me. I was stronger than that. I continued to camp and enjoy the great outdoors, but I was always more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. The wilderness held many secrets, and I had learned that some of them were darker than I could have ever imagined. In the end, I didn't let fear control me. I faced it head on and came out stronger. And as I sat by the campfire on my next trip, I knew that I was truly free. The sun was setting as I pulled my RV into a secluded spot at Lake Shasta, a hidden gem in Northern California. The place had a rustic charm, a perfect retreat after a grueling year. I parked near the water's edge, the lake's calm surface reflecting the fiery hues of the sky. It felt like a good escape from the stress of the city and my chaotic life. I've always enjoyed the solitude of nature. It gives me space to think and clear my head. My name's Nolan Dorsey, by the way. Life hasn't been particularly kind lately. Too much pressure at work, a recent breakup, and a pile of bills I couldn't seem to reduce. So when I got the chance to borrow my buddy's RV and head out here, I didn't hesitate. The first few hours were blissful. I set up a small fire pit, roasted some marshmallows, and enjoyed the serene atmosphere. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl added to the peaceful vibe. It was getting dark, so I decided to retire inside the RV, intending to wake up early for some fishing. As I was about to close the door, I noticed a flicker of movement near the tree line. A figure stood there, motionless. It was too dark to make out any details, but it was unmistakably a person. My heart skipped a beat. Who else would be out here? Hello? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The figure remained still, and a sense of unease crept over me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and peered through the window. The figure had disappeared. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread. Maybe it was just another camper or my mind playing tricks on me. I settled into the RV, trying to convince myself there was nothing to worry about. I watched some TV, had a beer, and eventually fell asleep. I woke up to a loud thud against the RV. It was pitch black outside, and the clock on the wall showed 2:13 a.m. My heart pounded as I listened for any more sounds. Another thud. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and hesitated, wondering if I should step outside, but curiosity and a sense of self-preservation won over. I opened the door cautiously, shining the flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. As I scanned the area, I noticed something strange. A crude wooden totem standing just a few feet from the RV. It wasn't there before. My throat went dry. I approached the totem slowly, noticing the intricate carvings of faces twisted in anguish. Goosebumps prickled my skin. Who could have placed it there, and why? Suddenly, a rustling noise behind me made me spin around. The figure from before was back, but now closer. I could see him more clearly in the flashlight beam. A tall man with wild, unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they had been through hell. His eyes, though I couldn't see their color, were intense and filled with a menacing gleam. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward, his gaze locked on me. Panic surged through me. I bolted back to the RV, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to call the police. No signal. Desperation clawed at me. I rummaged through the drawers, finding a flare gun. It wasn't much, but it was something. I sat on the bed, clutching it tightly, waiting for the first light of dawn. The night dragged on, every minute feeling like an hour. I heard footsteps circling the RV, but no attempts to break in. Whoever he was toying with me. The hours crawled by, and eventually the first rays of sunlight pierced through the curtains. The footsteps stopped. I dared to peek outside. The totem was gone, and so was the man. I debated whether to pack up and leave immediately or stay and figure out what was going on. Part of me was too stubborn to be chased away. After a quick breakfast, I decided to investigate the area where I had seen the man. The ground was disturbed, footprints leading in and out of the woods. I followed them, keeping the flare gun ready. The trail led deeper into the forest, where I found a small makeshift campsite. It looked abandoned, but recent. My eyes caught sight of something shiny, partially buried in the dirt. I dug it out. It was a small, ornate box covered in dirt and grime. I opened it cautiously, revealing a collection of old photographs. They were black and white, showing a family, a man, woman, and a little girl. The man looked eerily similar to the figure I had seen. My skin prickled with unease. I took the box back to the RV and spent the next few hours trying to make sense of it. The photos seemed old, decades old. Why was this man carrying them? Who were these people? Later in the afternoon, as I was sitting outside, a voice startled me. Found something interesting. I turned to see an old man standing a few feet away, leaning on a cane. He must have been in his 70s, with a weathered face and a knowing look in his eyes. "Who are you?" I asked, standing up, still holding the flare gun. "Name's Everett," he said, raising a hand in a peaceful gesture. "I live nearby, saw your RV, and thought I'd come say hello." "Everett, do you know anything about a man wandering around here? Looks a bit deranged." Everett's expression darkened. "You've seen him, haven't you?" I nodded, and he sighed deeply, sitting on a log. "That's Henry. Used to be a decent fellow until, well, things went south." "What do you mean?" I asked. Everett began to recount the tale. Henry was once a local fisherman, known to everyone in the area. He had a family, a wife and a daughter. They lived happily by the lake until one night his family disappeared without a trace. The authorities searched, but no bodies were found. Henry was devastated and eventually lost his mind, convinced they were taken by something in the woods. He became a hermit, living out here, away from people. Folks around here steer clear of him, Everett explained. Some say he still thinks he can find them. The pieces started to fit together, but it didn't explain why Henry was now stalking me. "Why is he after me?" I asked. Everett shook his head. "Hard to say. Maybe he sees you as a threat, or maybe he's just lost touch with reality completely." That night, I couldn't sleep. Everett had offered to stay, but I declined. I needed to confront Henry to understand why he was tormenting me. Armed with the flare gun, I set out once more to the campsite. It was empty, but fresh footprints suggested he was nearby. As I searched, I heard a faint cry for help. My heart raced as I followed the sound. It led me to a small cave hidden by dense underbrush. Inside, it was dark and damp, but I could see a flicker of light deeper within. I crept forward, the cries growing louder. Rounding a corner, I saw Henry kneeling beside a shallow pit. Inside were two skeletons, partially buried. Their clothes were tattered, but recognizable from the photos I had found. Henry was weeping, holding a small, tattered teddy bear. He looked up as I approached, his face a mix of sorrow and madness. "They took them," he whispered, "but I found them." My mind raced, trying to comprehend the scene. These were his family's remains, but who had taken them and why? "Henry, who did this?" I asked gently. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "The people in the woods, they took them. They wanted to keep them here." Suddenly, a noise from behind made me turn. Everett stood there, his face grim. "It's time to end this, Henry," he said. Henry's eyes widened in fear. "No, you're one of them." Before I could react, Henry lunged at Everett, a knife appearing in his hand. I fired the flare gun instinctively. The bright flash and the searing pain of the flare struck Henry, sending him sprawling to the ground. Everett rushed to restrain him, but it was too late. Henry's breathing became shallow, and within moments, he was still. Everett looked at me, his face lined with sorrow. I didn't want it to end this way. "What did he mean?" "You're one of them," I demanded. Everett sighed, sitting down heavily. Henry wasn't entirely wrong. There were people, cultists, who believed the lake had mystical powers. They used to perform rituals here, sacrifices. When Henry's family disappeared, I knew it was them. I tried to stop it, but they were too powerful. Over the years, they've dwindled, but the memories haunted Henry. He never recovered. I sat down, trying to process everything. "So what now?" Everett shook his head. "We bury them properly and hope that Henry finds peace at last." We worked in silence, giving Henry and his family a proper burial by the lake. As the sun rose, casting a golden light over the water, a sense of calm finally settled over me. I packed up the RV, ready to leave this place behind. As I drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the lake one last time. The peaceful surface belied the horrors it had witnessed, but it also held a sense of closure, and in the end, that's all I could ask for. My journey started in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where I decided to take a break from my usual city life and venture into the wilderness for some much-needed solitude and introspection. My name is Aidan Lawrence, a name that might not ring a bell to most, but I've had my fair share of life's ups and downs. I've always been an avid camper, finding peace in the raw embrace of nature away from the cacophony of urban life. The day began with the soft glow of dawn seeping through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I packed up my RV, checking my supplies meticulously: food, water, a first aid kit, and a sturdy hunting knife, just in case. The plan was simple: a short hike to a nearby lake, some fishing, and then back to the RV before dusk. The hike was uneventful at first. I followed a narrow trail, the path winding through dense woods, occasionally crossing small streams that sang of life hidden in the underbrush. Birds chirped overhead, and the forest felt like it was breathing alongside me. It was the perfect escape, or so I thought. I reached the lake by mid-morning. Its surface was a mirror, reflecting the blue sky and the towering pines surrounding it. Setting up my fishing gear, I cast the line and settled into a quiet rhythm, my thoughts wandering. Time slipped by unnoticed until the sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange hue over the landscape. It was time to head back. The return hike felt different. The woods, which had seemed inviting in the daylight, now felt oppressive as the shadows lengthened. The sounds of the forest changed too, growing quieter, more sinister. I quickened my pace, a sense of unease creeping in. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. About halfway back, I noticed something strange: a rusted old truck hidden behind a thicket, well off the beaten path. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it cautiously. The vehicle looked like it had been abandoned for years, its tires flat and windows shattered, but something about it felt off, like it was deliberately placed there to be found. As I circled the truck, I saw the dried splatters of what could only be blood on the seats and a rusty shovel lying in the bed. Panic nodded at me, but I forced myself to stay calm. The logical part of my brain told me to turn back, to head straight to the RV and drive away as fast as I could, but a part of me needed to know what had happened here. I pushed deeper into the woods, following a barely visible trail leading away from the truck. The forest grew denser, the air heavier. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a clearing. My heart froze at the sight before me. A small makeshift campsite with a tent, a campfire long extinguished, and more blood. There were signs of a struggle, broken branches and footprints in the dirt. Then I saw him, a man sitting on a fallen log, his clothes tattered and stained with dried blood. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, and he stared at me with a look that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as I approached cautiously. "Hey, are you all right?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. He didn't respond. I took a step closer, and that's when I noticed the knife in his hand, the blade glinting in the fading light. "Stay back," he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper but laced with an unmistakable threat. "This is my place. You don't belong here." "I'm just passing through," I said, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'll leave now." "Too late for that," he muttered, rising to his feet. He was tall, much taller than I'd initially thought, and the way he moved with a predator's grace sent my instincts into overdrive. Without another word, he lunged at me, the knife flashing through the air. I barely managed to dodge the blade, raising my arm. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline kicked in, dulling the sensation. I stumbled backward, trying to put distance between us, but he was relentless. In the struggle, I tripped over a root, falling hard to the ground. He was on me in an instant, and I knew I had to fight back, or this would be the end. With all my strength, I kicked at his legs, throwing him off balance. As he fell, I grabbed a nearby rock and struck him on the head. He collapsed, unconscious, or worse. I didn't wait to find out. Blood dripped from my arm, but I forced myself to stand and run. My mind was a blur, instincts taking over as I navigated the darkening forest. I didn't stop until I reached the RV, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I grabbed the first aid kit, bandaging my wound with shaking hands. The realization of what had just happened crashed over me. I needed to get out of here fast. I started the RV, my hands still trembling, and drove away, the forest fading in the rearview mirror. My thoughts raced. Who was that man? What had he done? The questions nodded at me, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to report this to the authorities. But even as I made my way to the nearest town, a part of me feared what I might uncover. I reached the town after nightfall, heading straight to the police station. The officers listened to my story with a mix of skepticism and concern, especially when they saw the wound on my arm. They dispatched a team to investigate the area while I was taken to the local clinic for treatment. The next few hours were a blur of questions and answers, but one detail stood out. The man I had encountered was wanted for multiple murders, a serial killer who had been eluding the authorities for years. They found his hideout, confirming my story. He was dead. The blow to his head had been fatal. As I sat in the clinic, my arm bandaged and my mind reeling, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to becoming another one of his victims. The forest, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a place of nightmares. But I knew one thing for sure. I had survived, and I wasn't going to let this experience haunt me. Life would go on, and I'd find peace again. But the memory of that day would always linger, a reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be. Looking back, I realized the world is filled with shadows, and sometimes those shadows hide real monsters. But I had faced one and lived to tell the tale, stronger and more aware of the darkness that can lurk just out of sight. My name is Jacob Lopez, and I'm 42 years old. This happened last October during one of the lowest points in my life. I had just lost my husband Michael to a sudden heart attack. Writing was my only solace, so I decided to take my RV and set out on the road, researching stories of folklore and urban legends for my next book. I thought immersing myself in old tales would help me escape my grief. Instead, it brought me face to face with something I can't explain, something that nearly destroyed me. It started with Devil's Hollow Road, a stretch of pavement just outside Fort Wayne, Indiana, surrounded by dense woods and steeped in chilling stories about witches and the devil himself. I'd come across the name while researching local legends and knew I had to see it for myself. I wish I hadn't. The trip began uneventfully. I parked my RV in a clearing near the edge of the road, a little farther from the main campground than I probably should have. I wanted privacy to write and think, and the spot was perfect. Quiet, secluded, surrounded by towering trees that glowed gold and orange in the autumn sun. The first sign that something wasn't right came at a gas station just outside the area. The attendant, a grizzled man with a thick beard and tired eyes, gave me a strange look when I mentioned where I was headed. "Devil's Hollow, huh?" he said, leaning on the counter. "You doing one of those ghost hunting shows?" "No, I'm a writer. I'm working on a book about local legends." He snorted. "Well, you've picked the right place. Folks around here say that road's cursed. They say people see lights in the woods, hear voices that ain't there. Some folks go up there and never come back." I forced a smile. "Sounds like a story waiting to be told. Just don't go looking for trouble," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "The stories might be more than just stories." I arrived at my campsite in the late afternoon. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows over the RV. It was beautiful, but unnervingly still. That night, as I sat at my laptop trying to write, I heard a scratching noise outside. It started faint, like twigs brushing against the side of the RV, but grew louder, more deliberate. "Probably just a raccoon," I muttered to myself, grabbing a flashlight. When I stepped outside, the air was sharp and cold. I shone the light around the RV, half expecting to see an animal scurrying away. Instead, I found long, deep scratches on the side of the vehicle, 3 parallel lines that stretched nearly from top to bottom. My stomach churned. No raccoon had claws that big. I retreated inside, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. Devil's Hollow was eerie even in daylight. The trees grew thick and close, their twisted branches forming almost a canopy overhead. The road itself was cracked and uneven, as if the earth beneath it had shifted. About a mile from my campsite, I found it, a burned patch of ground with a strange symbol scorched into the dirt. It was a pentagram, surrounded by intricate runes I didn't recognize. I crouched down, running my fingers over the charred edges. The air around the marking felt colder, as if the ground itself were leaching away heat. My breath fogged in the air, even though the day wasn't particularly cold. I pulled out my phone to take a photo, but the screen glitched, static lines distorting the image. "Great," I muttered, slipping the phone back into my pocket. As I stood, I felt a prickle of unease, like I was being watched. I spun around, but there was no one there. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The scratches on the RV, the burned symbol, the glitching phone. It all felt connected, though I couldn't explain how. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat by the fire, trying to focus on my notebook. The air grew colder, and the shadows around me deepened, stretching like grasping fingers. Then I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and thin, shrouded in shadow. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkness, locking onto mine. I froze, my pen slipping from my hand. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but the figure was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV felt stifling, the air heavy with unease. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. Then the whispers started. At first, they were faint, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but soon they grew clearer, more insistent. "Jacob." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. "Jacob." It was my husband's voice. I stumbled to the window, peering out into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw him, Michael, standing just beyond the trees, but when I blinked, he was gone. The next day, desperate for answers, I returned to the burned marking. The air felt even colder than before, and the forest was deathly silent. This time, I found more. Scattered around the pentagram were blackened candles, animal bones, and dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. As I stared at the remnants of the ritual, the whispers started again, louder this time. "Come to us." The wind picked up, swirling leaves around me. I turned to run, but my foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling to the ground. When I looked up, the shadowy figure was there, standing over me. Its face was featureless, a void of darkness. Its glowing eyes bore into mine, filling me with a suffocating sense of dread. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the RV, my breath hitching in my throat. That night, he came for me. The RV's lights flickered, plunging me into darkness. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the windows, and then he was inside. I don't know how I got in. I didn't hear the door open, but when I turned, he was there. The silent man. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, his presence filling the small space like a black hole. Why are you doing this? I choked out. He tilted his head, his glowing eyes narrowing. Then the RV shifted, the walls groaning as if under immense pressure. Suddenly, the silent man raised a hand and the world around me changed. I was no longer in the RV. I was in my living room. The scent of Michael's cologne filled the air. He stood in front of me smiling, his arms open wide. "Jacob," he said softly. "It's okay. You can let go now. You can stay here with me." Tears blurred my vision. "Michael?" But then his face twisted, his smile stretching too wide. His skin cracked, revealing the same dark void I'd seen in the silent man. "No!" I screamed, yanking myself away from the illusion. Back in the RV, the silent man advanced on me, his presence suffocating. Desperate, I grabbed a can of camping fuel and splashed it across the floor. My hands shook as I struck a match. The tiny flame danced in the darkness. "This ends now," I said, my voice trembling. I dropped the match. The fire roared to life, filling the RV with heat and light. The silent man recoiled, his shadowy form writhing as the flames consumed him. I stumbled out into the cold night, watching as the RV burned, the whispers fading into silence. I never went back to Devil's Hollow. I lost almost everything in the fire. My laptop, my notes, my equipment. But I survived. Now, as I write this, I still wonder if it was all real, if the silent man was a figment of my grief or something darker. But sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers outside my window, and I wonder if he's waiting for me to return. My name is Riley Marks, and I'm 33 years old. This happened last fall when I traveled to Black Bayou Lake in northern Louisiana. I was there to write an article on the folklore of Louisiana's most haunted places, but the story I uncovered was something I could never put into print. What I found in the bayou was far too personal and far too terrifying to share with anyone. Until now. I had been traveling in my RV for a few weeks, chasing legends. I'd interviewed locals about haunted plantations, mysterious swamp creatures, and long-forgotten ghost towns. Black Bayou was meant to be the grand finale, the perfect setting to cap off my piece, with its shadowy waters, gnarled cypress trees, and the legend of La Dame Sombre. I didn't believe in ghosts, of course, not really. I thought there might be something to the stories, a flicker of truth twisted into folklore, but nothing supernatural. I was wrong. I arrived at the wildlife refuge late in the afternoon. The golden sunlight filtering through the trees made the bayou look almost peaceful. But there was an underlying silence that unnerved me. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my RV tires crunching gravel as I pulled into the visitor center parking lot. A woman stepped out to greet me. She was older, with wiry gray hair tied back in a ponytail and sun-worn skin. Her name tag read Marcy. She gave me a once-over, sizing me up like she'd seen my kind before. "Journalist, huh?" she said as I introduced myself. "Y'all always poking around here asking about La Dame," she added. "Is the legend true?" I asked, smiling, trying to put her at ease. She didn't return the smile. "It's true enough. I'll tell you this much. Don't go wandering off after dark. She don't like being disturbed." Before I could press her for more, a man in waders walked past carrying a fishing pole. He tipped his hat at me and said, "Better listen to her. This place will play tricks on you if you're not careful." I laughed nervously, but neither of them looked like they were joking. That evening, I parked my RV at the designated campsite near the water. I set up my equipment, camera, audio recorder, and notepad, and waited for the sun to set. The bayou transformed at night. The golden light gave way to an eerie, inky darkness. The trees cast long shadows over the still water, and the air felt heavier, damp and clinging. I started recording notes, speaking softly into my phone. Day 1. Black Bayou Lake. Locals are tight-lipped about La Dame Sombre, but they all seem to believe in her. Legend says she was a woman betrayed by her lover, Back, who lured her into the bayou and left her to drown. Her spirit's been haunting the water ever since, pulling people under if they get too close. I paused, feeling a chill run down my spine. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard humming. It was faint, almost too soft to hear, but unmistakably human. I turned off the recorder and stepped outside, shining my flashlight toward the water. The beam caught the gnarled roots of a cypress tree and nothing else. The humming stopped. The next day, I met a man named Cole at the visitor center. He was loading a small boat onto his truck. His face was tanned from years spent on the water. "You the one asking about La Dam?" he asked, spitting into the dirt. I nodded, and he chuckled darkly. "You don't look like the type to believe in ghosts." "I don't," I said. "I'm just writing a story." "Well, here's a story for you." He leaned against his truck, his expression growing serious. "A buddy of mine went out fishing one night, chasing lights he saw on the water, never came back. We found his boat the next morning, stuck in the reeds. No sign of him, but his pole was still in the water, like he just stepped away for a second." "What kind of lights?" I asked. "Lanterns, maybe, or something like that. Could have been La Dam luring him in. That's what the old folks say she does. Calls you out there with her singing or her lights, and once you follow her, you're done for." That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the bayou pressed against my ears like a weight. The faint humming I'd heard the night before had been easy enough to brush off as my imagination, but Cole's story had settled into my mind, churning like the water below. Around midnight, I heard it again, the humming. This time, it was closer, louder, and undeniably real. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off the water's surface. At first, I saw nothing. Then, in the distance, a flickering light appeared. It was faint, like the glow of an old oil lantern. I should have gone back inside. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to lock the doors and wait for morning. But something, curiosity, guilt, or maybe sheer stupidity, pushed me forward. I grabbed my boots and a jacket and followed the light. The trail wound through the trees, twisting and turning, until I lost sight of my RV entirely. The lantern light bobbed ahead of me, always just out of reach. I called out once, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. The only response was the soft splash of water as I stepped onto the edge of the bayou. That's when I heard it, a voice, soft, melodic, and heartbreakingly familiar. "Riley," I froze. It couldn't be. The voice was faint but unmistakable. Eli, my younger sibling. They'd been missing for nearly 20 years, lost on a camping trip when I was supposed to be watching them. The memory of that day had haunted me ever since, and hearing their voice now sent a chill down my spine. "Eli?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" The lantern light flickered, and a shadowy figure appeared on the water. It was hard to make out, but the shape was human, standing impossibly still on the surface of the bayou. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I took a step closer, then another. "Come closer," the voice whispered. "Help me." I was waist deep in the water before I realized something was wrong. The figure wasn't moving. Its outline shimmered and wavered like smoke, and its eyes, dark, empty hollows, locked onto mine. The humming started again, louder this time, vibrating through my chest. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but the water around me began to ripple. Shadowy shapes darted beneath the surface, circling me like predators. I stumbled, falling to my knees, and that's when I saw her. La Dam Sombre rose from the water. Her figure was impossibly tall and gaunt. Her skin was pale and slick, her hair hanging in wet, tangled strands over her face. Her eyes glowed faintly, and her mouth curved into a jagged, unnatural smile. "You came for them," she said, her voice like a hiss, "but they're not here." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Her hand reached for me, long and skeletal, dripping with black water. My mind raced, searching for something, anything that could save me. Then I remembered Marcy's warning. I fumbled in my pocket and found the small silver charm she'd given me earlier that day for luck. She'd said it would protect me, but I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I held it up, my hand trembling, and the ghost let out an ear-piercing scream. The water around me churned violently, and the shadowy shapes vanished. La Dam Sombre recoiled, her form flickering like a dying flame. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of my RV. I left Black Bayou the next morning, my hands still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The charm sat on the dashboard, its surface tarnished and warm to the touch. I didn't look back as I drove away, but the haunting melody of her humming stayed with me. Even now, I hear it sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet. I'll wake up drenched in sweat, convinced she's outside my window, waiting. And maybe she is. Maybe La Dame Sombre never really lets you go. But there's one thing I know for certain. I won't be writing that article.